The fun life of a troll in the Marvel Universe. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 1, An Indescribable Way of Traveling. Traveling through time. This is Sherlock's most direct thought when he stood in front of the mirror, but thinking about his way of traveling through time, Sherlock still felt a little incredible and even had a feeling that he had opened the door to something outrageous, and it was outrageous to the extreme. As a 996 social animal, after a week of capital exploitation, Sherlock finally ushered in his long-awaited vacation, although he was free for only one day. As a standard social animal, Sherlock's mind was full of thoughts of sleeping until the sky was dark, and living a life of sleeping when he woke up, and eating when he was hungry all day. In fact, Sherlock did the same thing. Others slept until they woke up naturally, but Sherlock was woken up by the living habits he had developed for a long time. Yes, Sherlock was awakened by hunger. Sherlock randomly ordered a takeaway in a daze. He didn't even look at what he ordered, and fell asleep again. When he woke up again, he was still awakened by the knock on the door of the takeaway. Sherlock took the food he ordered from the delivery man in a daze, and even did not forget to politely say thank you to the hard-working delivery man. Then, he opened a short video website and started to fill his stomach with electronic pickled mustard. Sherlock did not even know what he had eaten, but mechanically stuffed the food into his mouth. His attention was on the long-legged ladies wearing unusually cool clothes twisting to the dynamic music on his phone. After mechanically eating the food that he did not know whether it should be considered breakfast or lunch, Sherlock lay on his bed again. With his mind full of long-legged ladies, Sherlock successfully reunited with the ladies he had just seen in his dream. Looking at a large group of long-legged ladies wearing stockings that almost made up the entire color card, Sherlock in his dream was about to shout and transform into a wolf to enjoy the happiness of a pool of wine and a forest of meat. A sharp pain came from Sherlock's abdomen, which made Sherlock sober up. Feeling the young ladies leaving him, Sherlock could only curse the unclean takeaway while picking up a cigarette and rushing to the throne in the bathroom of his rental house. Everything was so normal up to here, just an ordinary LS social animal's daily rest, but there is a but in everything, and what happened next was outrageous. Sitting on the throne with a cigarette in his mouth, Sherlock seemed to have a premonition of the next tragedy. After taking a deep breath, he began his ejection journey with the force. Just as Sherlock felt the unspeakable feeling in his anus, he just blinked his eyes, and the toilet of the rental house that was originally blocked and dark in front of him turned into a luxurious toilet that was almost the same size as his bedroom. At that moment, Sherlock's mind was full of ideas such as quantum entanglement and cohabitation in space and time. He didn't notice the fact that he seemed to have traveled through time and even had the mind to comment on the decoration style of this luxurious toilet. After all, for Sherlock, time travel was only seen in novels. It was impossible for such a thing to happen in reality. Compared with time travel, Sherlock would rather believe that this was an illusion caused by food poisoning. Sherlock even hesitated whether he should call 120 or something to give himself first aid. After all, up to now, in addition to the illusion of this luxurious toilet, Sherlock only had diarrhea as a symptom. The cigarette in his hand was still the same Marlboro with a short mouthpiece and a long handle, the king of cost-effectiveness for office animals. The only difference was that his hands seemed to have become a little whiter and a little more hairy. Wait, a little more hairy? A little whiter? He hurriedly threw the cigarette butt into the toilet, hurriedly grabbed the toilet paper, and wiped his butt, and Sherlock took 2 steps at a time and left his throne to the mirror. He saw a white young man who looked a few points more handsome than Leonardo, the grass on earth, and even his figure was incomparably perfect. Streamlined muscles, 8-pack abs, a dog waist, and a face that is even more handsome than Leo. Sherlock admits that, even if he is a man, he feels like drooling at the young man in the mirror. Just when Sherlock felt that he should call 120 for rescue, a vague memory hit Sherlock's mind. After a while, Sherlock finally saw the fact that he had traveled through time. The guy's name is Sherlock Felix, and he is a rich second generation. Just like the usual setting of time travel novels, this guy, like Sherlock himself, is an orphan who enjoys the buff of his parents' sacrifice to heaven. The only difference from Sherlock is that his buff seems to have been successfully loaded. He was born in New York and opened a gun store with the help of his parents after graduating from high school. Later, with the help of a group of uncles who liked cosplaying 141 that his parents found from nowhere, he successfully turned the gun shop in the suburbs into a nationally famous firearms training center. Even some active military personnel and celebrities would come to the gun shop for training from time to time. The boy's parents were also very considerate. After their death, they even left him a fund that he could not use up in his lifetime. In short, as long as the boy did not start a business or invest in anything, he could receive a fixed fund of $100,000 every month. Even the car that the boy drove was the dream car that Sherlock could not afford as a social animal for his whole life, the Ford Raptor. In addition to these general memories, Sherlock did not get any useful memories. It seems that this boy is also a social phobia and rarely goes out on weekdays. Sherlock expressed his extraordinary praise for the fact that he had jumped from a 996 social animal to a rich second generation with a worry-free life. After all, he was an orphan in his previous life. Sherlock, who was used to being alone, didn't have anything to let go of. If he had to say it, it was just that he couldn't let go of his longing for his motherland. The only thing that Sherlock couldn't understand was his outrageous way of traveling through time, especially compared to the ways of his predecessors. Who would have thought that he could travel through time? So what? The body that traveled through time was also traveling through time. Sherlock could even be sure that he just blinked his eyes during the spraying process and traveled here. He even traveled through time inexplicably without stopping the spraying process. Sherlock made a 6 with one hand, and then he excitedly tidied his clothes and decided to go downstairs to take a look. After all, according to Sherlock's inherited memory, downstairs was his own gun shop, and behind it was a very wide shooting range and training ground. As an old gun fan, Sherlock, who was born and raised here, had been coveting those beautiful guns for a long time. Now that he had traveled through time, he had the conditions, so he had to go downstairs and take his favorite guns to have fun. Thinking of this, Sherlock couldn't hold back his emotions anymore and rushed downstairs quickly. Hey, Alaska big baby, big baby, big spray gun, small pistol, wait for my love. Chapter 2 Bad News and Goldfinger. After the complacent Sherlock opened the door of his gun shop, he saw a dazzling array of firearms hanging on the wall, from the X series to the R series. From firearms to accessories, everything was neatly arranged. The most exaggerated thing was that there was an Italian cannon of the same model as Li Yunlong placed in the middle of the entire venue. Although there was a "not for sale" sign next to the cannon, Sherlock couldn't help but sigh. It was worthy of being the free America, the beacon of gunfights every day. This fucking cannon can be placed in the store as a display. What else can't be done? Of course, in addition to these firearms, that can be called a treasure trove for military fans, Sherlock was naturally surprised by his English level. The dense English letters on the display board looked no different from Chinese to Sherlock, and Sherlock even tried it specifically, and he could switch between Chinese and English seamlessly. This made Sherlock almost cry with excitement. You know, in the 4 years of college, Sherlock was among the top students in all professional courses, except for English. It was as if he had a grudge against Sherlock. He failed every year, took makeup exams every year, and retook classes every year. If it weren't for the fact that the English teacher saw Sherlock's pity and gave him a lot of money the following year, it would have been difficult for Sherlock to get his diploma. A wave of time travel solved the two major problems in his life, poverty and English. Sherlock felt that his life seemed to have reached its peak. He happily took a fully modified AK-105 rifle from the wall and held it in his arms. While enjoying the pleasure of pulling the bolt with his backhand, he found a big chair on his sales counter and turned on the TV with satisfaction. With a gun in hand, I have the world. Sherlock wanted to see what interesting TV programs were on the TV on the other side of the ocean. However, as soon as the TV was turned on, Sherlock's originally happy and satisfied mood fell to the bottom of the valley like a roller coaster. The reason was also very simple. The person who appeared on the TV was familiar to Sherlock: Iron Man, Tony Stark. Seeing this man who looks exactly like Robert Downey Jr. hugging two incredibly beautiful models and making a yeah sign to the camera, Sherlock felt that his three views were shattered. Not caring about the big AK in his arms, he casually threw the AK-105 that he had treasured so much on the bar. Sherlock picked up the computer at hand and started googling frantically. After a long time, Sherlock stopped typing on the keyboard with tears in his eyes. He had only one thought in his mind: I want to go home. The reason is also very simple. After Sherlock's extensive search on the internet, he clearly realized that he seemed to have traveled to the world of Marvel. That's right, it's the Marvel world of Wakanda, where aliens invade at any time. There are purple potato spirits from the Cosmic Family Planning Committee, and technology far exceeds the world by hundreds of years, but they like to fight with cold weapons. But the good news is that in Sherlock's search, he did not find any genius school founded by the big bold trolls who can read minds, nor any strange cities like Gotham City and Metropolis. It can't be said that there are none at all. For some reason, these things all appear in the comics of a company, and they don't exist in reality. This made Sherlock feel relieved. Fortunately, it was not a DC Marvel Fusion American comic setting. Otherwise, based on the dark style of DC, Sherlock felt that it would be better for him to commit suicide as soon as possible. Although through a simple search, Sherlock roughly confirmed that he might be in the so-called movie world, not those weird comic settings, but Sherlock still felt cold all over. After all, before crossing over, Sherlock was born under the red flag, grew up in the spring breeze, and was well protected by the country. The most evil thing he had seen was the level of a fight between gangsters. Now that he has crossed over to the Marvel world, where human lives are worse than dogs, and in the disaster-stricken New York, Sherlock feels desperate. Sherlock, who is an orphan, has never had a strong sense of security since childhood. Now that he knows that he has crossed over to the Marvel world, Sherlock is even more anxious about his sense of security. In such a chaotic environment, Sherlock can't find anything to protect himself. Is it just the guns around him? This idea just came up, and Sherlock rejected it directly. Don't joke. If you really face those supervillains, let alone firearms, even if Sherlock holds the Italian cannon in his hand and uses it as a gun, he feels that his firepower is insufficient. Just as Sherlock was holding his head and constantly thinking about whether he could snatch the opportunity of the so-called protagonist, Sherlock's ears suddenly heard a pleasant ding sound. This sound is so clear and so pleasant. According to Sherlock's previous routine of reading novels, Sherlock guessed that it should be his golden finger that has arrived. System? System father? System mother? Ancestor? You appear after you ding. Sherlock cursed and kept posing strange postures, trying to prove that it was not his hallucination just now, and frantically wanted to summon the system that just dinged. Don't say it. Sherlock really succeeded. At the moment of posing a strange posture, Sherlock was cursing, but found that he seemed to have come to a place that looked like a library in an instant. The huge bookshelves were lined up in rows and seemed to have no end. The books on them looked extremely old and seemed to be antiques. Next to Sherlock were two extremely tall things that looked like vending machines. After studying them for a while, Sherlock still couldn't find out what the two vending machines were selling. After Sherlock finished studying the two vending machines, Sherlock's attention was immediately attracted by a long box on a table not far in front. After he couldn't wait to open the box, Sherlock was immediately stunned by what was inside the box. Sherlock was very familiar with the things inside. It was the old wand in Harry Potter. And it was an old wand with extremely fine workmanship that looked like the real thing. What the hell? Sherlock picked up the old wand in the box with some surprise. In an instant, a stream of memories flooded into Sherlock's head. It's not quite right to say that it's a memory. It should be said that it's a feeling. The moment he picked up the old wand, Sherlock was almost certain of one thing, that this old wand was absolutely loyal to him, and he could indeed use the magic in Harry Potter with this old wand. After a long while, Sherlock gradually calmed down, as if he had thought of something. With a twitch in his mouth, he looked at the endless rows of bookshelves not far away. If Sherlock guessed correctly, He could use magic with a wand now, so those rows of bookshelves should be the so-called magic books in Harry Potter, right? He put the wand on his ear and went to the bookshelf to verify his guess. Just a book made Sherlock shed painful tears. He never expected that he had graduated for a long time, but now he had to start his learning journey all over again, and he was completely self-taught! Exclamation mark. Thinking about the protagonists in the novels he read before crossing, they either had a sign-in system or a lying system, all kinds of things that were easy to get. Looking at his endless bookshelf, Sherlock couldn't help but feel sad and shed tears of humiliation. Fortunately, he had experienced such things in his previous life, and with a training of 996, Sherlock sorted out his mood in just a short time. Damn, isn't it just a roll? To be honest, which nation in the world can roll more than the Great Chinese? For the sake of his own life, Sherlock picked up the basics of magic, from beginners to burial in his hand with a look of grief and indignation, and began to study. Chapter 3 Uncles Who Like Cosplay. Just when Sherlock was about to immerse himself in the ocean of magic, a crisp doorbell sounded in Sherlock's ears, which woke Sherlock up. Sherlock came to his senses and found that he was still in the same position as in the library, holding an ancient magic book in one hand and his own old magic wand in the other, sitting at the cashier in a position that looked silly to outsiders. The doorbell that woke Sherlock up was the sound of those uncles who liked cosplay in Sherlock's memory pushing open the door. After swaying around, Sherlock was in a hurry to adjust his posture and hide the magic book and magic wand in his hand. As soon as Sherlock's thoughts came up, he was surprised to find that the magic book and magic wand in his hand disappeared without a trace, but Sherlock could still feel that the magic book and magic wand he had just read were lying quietly on the table in the library. This feeling was magical. Although he was looking at a gun shop that was so real in reality, he could still clearly perceive the huge library and everything inside. Seeing Sherlock standing there in a posture that seemed silly to outsiders, the tough guys who came in aggressively couldn't help but smile, and some even took out their phones to take a photo of Sherlock. The older tough guy who looked like Price slapped Sherlock's head in anger, which made Sherlock's brain reconnect. Looking at the 5 peerless tough guys standing in front of him, Sherlock swallowed hard. Not to mention, the appearance of these 5 guys was really not much different from the 5 tough guys who fell from the sky in Call of Duty. Looking at their arms, that were almost as thick as a girl's waist, Sherlock was even more envious. The excitement about his body, when he just came through, disappeared without a trace. According to the few memories of the original owner that Sherlock inherited, these 5 peerless tough guys don't just look like the 5 protagonists in Call of Duty. These 5 are really veterans who are similar to Task Force 141 in Call of Duty. Before Iron Man came out, these 5 people can definitely be said to be the top level of martial arts that ordinary humans can reach. When Sherlock told his parents that he wanted to open a gun shop, it was his parents who pulled a lot of connections to get them to join Sherlock's gun shop and gave them 40% of the shares. Facts have proved how correct the decision of Sherlock's parents who have ascended to heaven was. In just less than 2 years, with the help of these 5 people's names, Sherlock's gun shop has almost become a famous training base in New York and even the whole of America. As for liking to cosplay the 5 protagonists in Call of Duty, it is purely because these 5 old men use this way to miss their past battlefield experiences, although there are rumors that Call of Duty is based on these 5 people as prototypes. Thinking of the few memories in his mind, Sherlock could only awkwardly show a slightly twitching smile to the 5 people, especially the one in the lead, who was holding a cigar and looked 70% similar to Price. Uncle Price, you came very early today. Yes, you heard it right. Until now, Sherlock has been calling these uncles by their names in the game, and they also gladly accepted this name. In their words, this can hide their identities well and avoid being found by enemies. In this regard, Sherlock can only go along with these people. After all, he really can't beat them. Any one of these 5 people would be like a chicken to deal with Sherlock. Even under the supervision of these 5 uncles, Sherlock did not get tainted with bad habits like other young people in the lighthouse country, and even vaguely looked like a new soldier. In response to Sherlock's greeting, Price, who was holding a cigar, just rolled his eyes in annoyance and then looked at Sherlock, who was sitting at the cashier with an awkward smile in a bit of surprise. Rather than saying that we came early, it's better to say why you are so diligent to sit at the cashier today. In the past, I went to your bedroom to pull you out. In response to Price's question, Sherlock could only smile awkwardly, but his mind was spinning very fast. After a while, he answered with an awkward smile. Well, I think it's important to make some changes, right? Don't you think so, Uncle Price? Price didn't believe a word of Sherlock's sophistry, but Soap, who had been standing next to Price, saw the fully loaded AK-105 that Sherlock had placed aside with a sharp eye, and shouted in extreme surprise. Hey, little Sherlock, have you come to your senses, and are you ready to train with us? You never touched these things before. At most, you took customers to shoot targets or something like that. As Soap spoke, he walked forward, took the AK-105 that Sherlock had just taken from the counter, and inspected it very professionally. In response to Soap's question, Sherlock smiled on the surface and tried to change it, but in his heart, Sherlock had already started sending a telegram. God knows what the original owner's situation was, and now he has run into a trap. Although Sherlock's reasons were extremely ridiculous, it was amazing that the 5 people present did not refute it. Instead, they looked at each other with a smirk on their faces, and then Price walked up and patted Sherlock on the shoulder. Great idea. Starting tomorrow, the 5 of us will train you. Soap will be responsible for physical fitness, Ghost will be responsible for shooting, I will be responsible for tactics, Yang will be responsible for theory, and Gates will be responsible for blasting. Don't worry, little Sherlock. Since you want to change, as your uncle, we will definitely turn you into a real man. After saying that, without waiting for Sherlock's reaction, he patted Sherlock on the shoulder and walked towards his office behind the store. Not only Price, but even the 4 people behind him, Shengsha, patted Sherlock on the shoulder with a smirk on their faces and followed Price to the office behind. Just like in the game, Ghost also wears a mask all the time, but unlike in the game, the reason why this Ghost wears a mask is because he suffered facial injuries due to an explosion when he was in the army, so he always wears a mask. Unlike the silent and cold Ghost in the game, this Ghost doesn't like to talk either, but the exposed eyes have a lot of scenes. Looking at the teasing look of the Ghost, Sherlock broke his defense again. If he wasn't afraid of being beaten, Sherlock would have bent his waist and shouted that his personality collapsed. Exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. Chapter 4, Departure. 7 years passed in a flash. Sherlock was so busy that he even felt like he had been in high school for 7 years. Of course, despite being busy, Sherlock also gained a lot. During these 7 years, Sherlock learned firearms and tactics from his 5 uncles during the day, and learned magic from Harry Potter alone in his room at night. Sherlock was extremely fulfilled during the 7 years. In this world, where superheroes have not yet appeared, even without magic, Sherlock can be said to be the ceiling of force among ordinary people. Not only did he complete the learning tasks assigned by Price, but Sherlock's magic also made great progress. In terms of military affairs, in Price's words, Sherlock has reached the level of becoming their teammate, and what he lacks now is to experience a real battle with them. In terms of magic, according to Sherlock's estimation, he should be able to completely beat the ordinary auras in the original book. The reason why he can reach such a height is that Sherlock has thoroughly understood the operating principle of his library in these 7 years. In fact, it is very simple. The books on the bookshelves not only have simple functions like the textbooks and materials of Hogwarts, but also have some notes such as magic notes. As long as Sherlock is in the library and thinks with his head, the library can retrieve the books Sherlock needs. With this function, Sherlock's magic level can be said to have improved by leaps and bounds. After all, he is a player who has been fed with the notes of big hands such as Dumbledore, Grindelwald, Voldemort, and Professor Snape. It is estimated that it is difficult not to improve by leaps and bounds. Not only that, Sherlock even discovered some other magical uses of this library, of which Sherlock thinks the best are 2. One is to treat this library as a storage space, and some inanimate gadgets can be put into this empty library. The other is magical. Sherlock can simulate the making of potions in this library, as long as Sherlock wants. All the raw materials Sherlock needs, and items such as crucibles, will appear on the table in the library for Sherlock to learn. The only thing that is not so good is that Sherlock cannot use these simulated raw materials, potions and all chemical items, and can only use them for learning. It is a simplified version of the house, where wishes come true. Of course, apart from this point, the most annoying thing for Sherlock is the use of the two automatic receiving machines. After Sherlock's research, the functions of the two vending machines are also very simple. One is responsible for selling potions and raw materials such as herbs. The other is a machine responsible for selling magical animals and all chemical items and raw materials. The currency used by the two machines is the same, gold. It is these two vending machines that make Sherlock feel extremely annoyed. It may be because these things do not exist in the Marvel world. The whole world seems to have imposed a kind of rule on these things that come out of the vending machine. Take the potion as an example. As long as Sherlock exchanges the potion from the machine, it will add a debuff to the user, while ensuring the original efficacy of the potion. No, calling it a debuff may not be very accurate. To be precise, it should be called superpowers, and these superpowers are completely random, and there is no regularity at all. How did Sherlock know this? This is because Sherlock had a fever, and caught a cold after a heavy rain during training. Sherlock, who had a high fever, couldn't stand the discomfort, so he bought a bottle of cold medicine from Harry Potter. It turned out to be very effective. After just one bottle, Sherlock's ears began to emit steam, and the symptoms of cold and fever were cured in less than half an hour. When Sherlock woke up, a piece of information that looked like a memory suddenly appeared in his head. Debuff, Washin Uniu, cursed by the world. The effect is forced to occur, and cannot be eliminated. Effect. Anyone within a distance of 2 meters from the user can feel the ultimate pleasure. Time limit. 24 hours, 0 minutes and 0 seconds. Feeling the information in his mind, Sherlock almost jumped up and cursed. What is this? A walking aphrodisiac. Sherlock didn't want to enter the site of the snake shield so early. If he went out for a walk, the whole New York would probably be in trouble. You have to know that in order to avoid those big guys, Sherlock has obtained the golden finger, but he has never used magic in the real world. Those two bald heads, one white and one black, are not easy to mess with. Helplessly, Sherlock could only lie in the middle of the room, lock the door, and stay in the library for a whole day. This is the first time Sherlock knows that his golden finger has such a debuff. Sherlock, who did not give up, exchanged a bottle of the same potion again during another break, trying to find the pattern of this debuff. The second effect made Sherlock feel more broken, because the second effect is called superpower out of control. To put it simply, it is just like the movie of Superpower Out of Control. After taking the potion, Sherlock has the superpower of telekinesis. The power is so strong that Sherlock can even feel that, as long as he wants, he can completely pull the entire city off the earth. And the point of Sherlock's defense is that his magic can't do this. After saving money for a long time, Sherlock, who was unwilling to give up, bought a bottle of Lucky Spirit Potion, thinking that this thing might have a good ability. Even if it didn't have a good ability, Sherlock could buy lottery tickets to recover blood with the effect of Lucky Spirit Potion alone. But the third ability directly made Sherlock plan not to use these items with debuffs unless it was an emergency. Because the third effect was very simple, the name was good fortune and bad luck depend on each other, which simply means that the more luck you have, the more bad luck you will suffer. It is a pure and ineffective Lucky Spirit Potion. With this effect and the blessing of Lucky Spirit Potion, Sherlock will definitely win the first prize when buying a lottery ticket. But the next second, after knowing the winning, it is estimated that the lottery ticket in his hand will turn into ashes due to some force majeure factors. After these 3 attempts, Sherlock knew that he, a non-African, should give up the mentality of gambling as soon as possible. Unless it was a life and death situation. Otherwise, Sherlock still felt that he was not blessed enough to enjoy these magical potions. Chapter 5 Tony Stark disappears. Apart from these things that made people feel bored, in these 7 years, Sherlock has 2 other gains. The first is that after 7 years of tempering, Sherlock has become accustomed to the life on the other side of the ocean. Yes, you read it right, it's a habit. The reason is also very simple. The infrastructure of the Great Lighthouse Country, which is known as the world's #1, with superheroes everywhere, and countless times saving the world, really makes Sherlock feel bored. In his previous life, Sherlock was used to night markets, to kiosks, small supermarkets, etc. After the excitement at the beginning of the crossing, he was very surprised to find that these did not exist in this country known as the world's #1. Don't talk about night markets. If you are hungry at night and want to order a delicious midnight snack like before you crossed over, it is a pipe dream. Sherlock also understands why pickup trucks and large supermarkets are so popular in this country. It's really far away, not to mention the terrible public transportation. If you want to buy some food and drinks and don't want to be hungry in the middle of the night, then the best way is to stock up. And if you want to stock up, the best place is those large supermarkets. At this time, the huge cargo box of the pickup truck is really useful. That thing can really hold a lot of things. Of course, these are all small things. The most important thing is that Sherlock has learned something that he would never do before crossing over, which is to write a plan. Don't underestimate this thing. It is really useful in this world. Sherlock was able to learn this skill purely through blood and tears. Not to mention Sherlock, anyone who went to the supermarket to buy things without making a plan and found out that they had missed something when they got home and ran back and forth for a whole morning to barely buy everything would learn how to make a plan with tears in their eyes. In addition to the occasional zero-yuan purchase activities, if someone still tells Sherlock that life abroad is better than in China, Sherlock will definitely take out his magic wand and give that guy a heart-piercing shot to wake him up. If he still insists on his delusion, he can only send him to eat a big melon. Apart from these living habits, Sherlock was most surprised by the identity of his cheap parents who had long since ascended to heaven. These 2 people are actually inextricably linked to Stark Industries! Strictly speaking, his father actually has a blood relationship with Maria Stark, the mother of Tony Stark, who is Iron Man. According to his own generation, Maria Stark is his father's aunt, so strictly speaking, Tony Stark is his distant uncle. When Sherlock knew about this, he was so shocked that this matter was simply not something that could be told to outsiders. As for how Sherlock knew about this, he had to mention that he had just finished training with Price and others last year and found an invitation in his mailbox. Sherlock opened the invitation with doubts and found that it was an invitation from Pepper, inviting Sherlock to attend his uncle's birthday party. Don't say it, Sherlock really went, well, dressed up. As a result, not long after he went, Sherlock came back amid Price's ridicule. Can that be called a birthday party? That's simply a supermodel Y party! Although Sherlock considers himself an LSP, as an LSP who also has a code of conduct, Sherlock still can't stand the wine pool and meat forest in front of him. Anyway, Sherlock couldn't stand that kind of party, and he left without even saying a word to Tony Stark. Before becoming Iron Man, Tony was really a lawless and arrogant playboy, and Sherlock really didn't like such a Tony at all. Although he didn't have any substantial contact with Tony, Sherlock was still a junior who accepted the invitation. After handing the gift to Pepper, he still had some communication with the future aunt. Pepper also expressed his apologies to Sherlock. She didn't expect that Tony would forget about this matter after inviting his only nephew and called a group of supermodels. In this regard, Sherlock expressed his understanding and comforted his future aunt who felt tired. And after returning home, Sherlock made up his mind that before Tony disappeared in Afghanistan, Sherlock absolutely didn't want to have any contact with this arrogant playboy. In fact, Sherlock did so. Until the end of his 7-year study career, Sherlock never responded to any invitation from Tony. At most, he would call Pepper and ask her to convey his wishes during the holidays. And just when Sherlock finally completed his magic training in Price's training and became a salted fish a few days later, he was thinking about whether he should drive his big raptor to see the world. Sherlock received a call from Pepper again. On the phone, Pepper's voice was already crying, and she told Sherlock that Tony had just disappeared in Afghanistan and needed Sherlock to come to Stark Tower immediately. After all, according to the laws of the lighthouse, if Tony really suffered misfortune, then Sherlock, as Tony's only living relative, has the right to inherit all of Tony's property. After hearing what Pepper said, Sherlock knew, no matter how stupid he was, that the so-called plot of the Marvel world was about to begin. If nothing unexpected happened, Tony was being pressed by an electromagnet in an unknown cave in Afghanistan at this moment. Without any hesitation, Sherlock greeted Price and, at Price's request, drove to Stark Tower with a bucket of weapons. Although Sherlock looked anxious on the surface, only Sherlock knew that he was not anxious at all. After all, according to the plot, this was something Tony Stark had to go through. And because the terrorists needed Tony to help them make weapons, if nothing unexpected happened, although the situation looked critical, it was actually nothing. Sherlock even slowed down a little after leaving his gun shop for a distance and disappearing from Price's sight. Just as Sherlock was thinking about whether he could buy a cup of coffee on the way to Stark Tower, a spark suddenly appeared not far from Sherlock's road. Before Sherlock could react, a portal suddenly opened in front of Sherlock's car, and a figure that Sherlock didn't want to see walked out of the portal. Master Ancient One, one of the two bald men. Chapter 6 Broken, almost becoming Benedict Cumberbatch's substitute. Kamataj, Ancient One's exclusive temple, once again defeated Dormammu from the Dark Dimension, who was like a pervert, and the exhausted Ancient One was planning to take a good rest. Sitting in his own temple, drinking a cup of top-grade green tea, which Marvel fans call infinite refill tea, Ancient One felt that the recent fatigue seemed to disappear without a trace along with the fragrance of tea. He habitually controlled the time gem and the eye of Agamotto to see the future that he had already determined countless times, but it was such a habit that made Ancient One discover something different. The established future that was originally like a movie began to become as vague as if it was shrouded in a fog, and even the optimal solution that had been determined originally became like a mess at this moment. Discovering the difference, Ancient One exclaimed in surprise. The long life and pattern rarely made her interested in anything. This was the only time in hundreds of years that she was surprised. Driven by curiosity, Ancient One began to reorganize the timeline. Soon, Ancient One discovered the abnormality and discovered who the person who was shrouded in the optimal solution like a fog was. It was our protagonist Sherlock. The moment he saw Sherlock, Ancient One was extremely surprised because this was someone who had never appeared before. According to the original trajectory of the world, Sherlock should be an ordinary person. He even had no contact with Tony after parting ways at the only party. Even after Tony became Iron Man, in order to protect his only relative, he did not have much contact with this relative until he snapped his fingers. But now, in the pictures related to the future, the figure of this little guy is everywhere. Not only that, this little guy who was supposed to be ordinary seems to have some extraordinary power. Ancient One even saw the picture of this little guy standing with the Avengers. Surprised, a strong curiosity arose in Ancient One's heart, and he no longer hesitated, and a portal was opened directly. This is the scene at the beginning. Sherlock saw the Ancient One, one of the two bald heads he least wanted to see. Compared to Ancient One's curiosity, Sherlock felt uncomfortable at this moment. Sherlock, who had always been very cautious, had not used magic even once except for 3 times of using potions. He didn't know why Ancient One noticed him. Looking at Ancient One with the eye of Agamotto and the time gem emitting green light in the eye of Agamotto, Sherlock swallowed hard. In his mind, he even began to quickly simulate how he should deal with Ancient One, so that he would not be discovered by the big devil. Should he pretend not to know, open the car window and curse Ancient One as a transvestite psychopath like an ordinary person with a bad temper? Or should he take out his magic wand and fight with Ancient One, then retreat while fighting, and try to find a way to see if there is any powerful thing in his cargo box, and if it doesn't work, he will die together? Or should he get out of the car directly, kneel on his knees, hug Ancient One's thighs, and call him daddy? At that moment, Sherlock's mind was full of thoughts, and countless strange ideas kept popping up in his mind. But looking at the green time gem, Sherlock finally gave up those immature ideas in his mind, stopped the car honestly, stood beside the car, and looked at the Ancient One who was walking towards him. There was no way. The time gem was an absolute bug. It could be said that it could not kill you, but it could consume you. The only time prop in Harry Potter was the time converter. But compared with the time gem, it was like a father meeting his son. There was no comparison at all. Sherlock thought that he was not as good as Dormammu. Looking at the Ancient One who was walking over, Sherlock thought for a long time and finally did not take out his wand. Seeing that the Ancient One was getting closer and closer, Sherlock could only sigh and bow respectfully to this big man, who could wrestle with Odin. Master Ancient One, hello. Sherlock greeted the Ancient One honestly. Ancient One was not surprised at all that Sherlock knew his name. He looked at Sherlock, who was standing there a little uneasy, with a curious look. New magic power. Amazing little guy. Sherlock was embarrassed to see that Ancient One saw through his trump card at a glance. While rubbing the cold sweat on his forehead, he smiled at Ancient One awkwardly, not knowing what to answer. The green light of the time stone and the eye of Agamotto became more and more vigorous when Ancient One looked at Sherlock. Just when Sherlock was thinking about what to say to ease the awkward atmosphere, the eye of Agamotto suddenly closed, and the dazzling green light disappeared without a trace. Until this time, Ancient One looked at Sherlock standing in front of him with an amazed face. My own magic and magic power. Little guy, you are really amazing. Sherlock could only smile awkwardly and scratch the back of his head at Ancient One's exclamation. Sherlock, who didn't know what Ancient One was up to, could only say awkwardly that it was a compliment. Looking at the little guy who was still acting cute with him, Guyi just smiled calmly and asked Sherlock a question that almost made Sherlock drop his jaw. Do you want to become the Supreme Sorcerer? Sherlock almost thought that he had misheard or something about Guyi's sudden question. He looked at Guyi standing opposite him in horror, and his mouth opened and closed, and he couldn't say anything. Damn it, shouldn't the successor of the Supreme Sorcerer be Doctor Strange? When did he become himself? And to be honest, Sherlock didn't want to take over the position of the Supreme Sorcerer at all. Not to mention things like Thanos. The Dark Dimension alone was enough to make Sherlock feel numb. After confirming that he had heard it wrong, Sherlock waved his hand and rejected Guyi's proposal without hesitation. Guyi seemed to have expected Sherlock's rejection. He didn't say much, but took out a hanging ring and threw it to Sherlock and told Sherlock to go to Camotage to exchange magic when he had time. After saying that, he turned around and stepped into the portal and disappeared. With the disappearance of Ancient One, before Sherlock could relax, the surrounding environment shattered like glass and then disappeared little by little and finally returned to its original state. Seeing this scene, Sherlock almost couldn't stand. He had been in the mirror space just now, and he didn't even know when he entered the mirror space. What if he didn't think it through and really fought with Ancient One? Who knows how his life would be like this? Feeling palpitations, Sherlock almost climbed into the car with his own hands. After sitting in the car for a while, he gradually came to his senses and looked at the ring lying quietly on the passenger seat. Sherlock took a deep breath and finally picked up the ring and put it on his left hand. After all, from his performance just now, Ancient One didn't seem to have any ill will towards him. So this ring should also be a safe thing. Just as Sherlock was congratulating himself for having survived one of the two bald guys, Ancient One, who had returned to his temple, smiled and took a sip from his teacup, then exclaimed, "What an interesting little guy." What Sherlock didn't know was that in just a short while, Ancient One had already fought hundreds of rounds with Sherlock through the time stone. Sherlock's so-called trump card was completely exposed by Ancient One. Chapter 7 Obadiah Stanislavski's Malice 2023-07-29 Chapter 7 Obadiah Stane's Malice. It took Sherlock a while to recover his original mentality, and then he remembered why he appeared on this road. He hurriedly shifted gears and gave gas, and this path Sherlock could say that he didn't want to come again in his life. With the powerful power of the Raptor, Sherlock arrived downstairs of Stark Building in less than half an hour, watching the Stark Building, where people were still coming in and out as usual. After taking a deep breath, Sherlock thought about it and took out a Glock pistol from the glove box next to him. After thinking it over and over again, Sherlock gave up this middle school gun hiding posture, took out an underarm holster from the armrest box, stuffed the Glock into the holster, and got off the car with satisfaction. After all, this Glock was just a disguise. The security of Stark building was not for free. It would never be allowed to enter the building with weapons. The real weapons were hidden in Sherlock's library. The reason why he brought this Glock was to better fit his character. After all, he was the owner of a gun store. If he was not found with some weapons, it would be abnormal. You have to know that this was when the plot of Iron Man just began, and Obadiah Stane was still active in Stark Tower as a villain. This ruthless man could kill even Tony, the company's money tree, who he had seen since childhood. Sherlock didn't want to be remembered by this man. Sherlock, who had prepared everything, walked into the building. Just as expected, the Glock on his body was discovered by security, and Sherlock handed over his weapon with a curse. Then he walked quickly to the elevator. With the sound of the elevator dinging, Sherlock came to the top floor of Stark Tower, in front of Pepper's office. Just when Sherlock wanted to knock on the door was suddenly opened from the inside, and a tall and fat white uncle walked out. There was still a hypocritical look of concern on his face. The visitor was Obadiah Stane. Sherlock looked coldly at Obadiah Stane, who seemed to have just comforted Pepper, and said nothing. Obadiah Stane soon noticed the young man standing at the door who looked like an ordinary person. Sherlock almost clearly saw a flash of contempt in Obadiah Stane's eyes, as if he saw something disgusting. Before Sherlock could speak, Pepper spotted Sherlock, quickly stood up, wiped her red eyes from worrying about it, and came to Sherlock's side. She pulled Sherlock to Obadiah Stane, and said to him, "Uncle Obadiah, this is Sherlock Felix, Tony's only living relative, Tony's nephew." "Sherlock, this is Obadiah Stane, Tony's uncle. Since Tony's parents died, Uncle Obadiah has been taking care of Tony. Except for the lack of blood relationship, he is no different from a real uncle." After hearing what Pepper said, Obadiah Stane looked at Sherlock with a dangerous look in his eyes. Although he concealed it well, Sherlock, who had Dumbledore's notes, could clearly sense Obadiah Stane's malice through legitimacy. Although the two of them had some other ideas, when they saw each other, they did not show it now, but greeted each other very warmly. "It's our first meeting, Grandpa Obadiah. Uncle Tony often mentioned you to me," Sherlock said to Obadiah Stane with a fake smile. Obadiah Stane was also a smart man. Although he hated Sherlock's existence, he was still kind on the surface, just like an ordinary old man. "Really? You know, Tony never mentioned you to me once. This kid actually kept you so secret. I must have a good talk with him when he comes back." After Obadiah Stane finished speaking to Sherlock, he let go of Sherlock's hand and turned to look at Pepper standing next to Sherlock and continued, "I have something else to do, Pepper. I'll go back first. Don't worry, Tony is so smart, nothing will happen. I'll go and dodge those bastards in the military, and I'll definitely be able to find Tony back." Pepper, who didn't understand the situation, looked at Obadiah Stane gratefully after hearing what he said, as if she really expected Obadiah Stane to find Tony back. Looking at Pepper, whose eyes were gradually turning red, Obadiah Stane no longer hesitated. After saying hello, he walked out of the door with his bodyguards. Until the door closed, the smile on Obadiah Stane's face disappeared without a trace, leaving only a sinister expression. He violently dragged the bodyguard next to him, and said to him viciously, "Go find out who that little bastard is. Tony, that bastard, is hiding something from me. Go find out all the information about that little bastard. I want to see everything about that little bastard on my desk tomorrow morning." After hearing Obadiah Stane's words, Obadiah Stane's bodyguard nodded seriously and turned away, and began to arrange his men to investigate everything about Sherlock. Obadiah Stane himself looked at the closed door viciously, spat softly, and then opened the elevator to his office. Standing in the empty elevator, Obadiah Stane revealed his original face, and it seemed that his entire expression became distorted. "No one can stop me from taking the Stark group that should have belonged to me. Tony, you can't. Not even that little bastard you hid so well." If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel Mundo fanfic novelist. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 8 Jarvis. I hate people who have no sense of boundaries. Sherlock didn't know anything about Obadiah Stane's investigation, but even if he knew, he probably wouldn't care. After all, although Obadiah Stane was rich, he didn't have any superpowers or any black technology. Before Tony's ironmonger was made, this old man was just a rich old man. It was precisely because of this that Sherlock was not afraid of any provocation from Obadiah Stane. After all, strictly speaking, the only people related to Sherlock in this world were Tony and the uncles who liked to cosplay Task Force 141. Putting aside Tony, if Obadiah Stane really took action against Sherlock's uncles and wanted to use them as bargaining chips to threaten Sherlock, then he really found the wrong person. Putting aside the connections of those animals in the army, just the gangsters, killers, and private armed forces trained by these animals over the years are not comparable to what Obadiah Stane can do now. If Obadiah Stane really dared to attack Sherlock's uncles, he would probably experience what it means to be hunted by black, white, and grey. In addition to Sherlock's uncles, the only other person left is Sherlock, the LS, who is also a fun person. If Obadiah Stane attacked Sherlock, Sherlock would be even less afraid. Damn, how could a magician be bullied by a muggle? It is precisely because Sherlock is single that Sherlock does not seem to be worried about anything. Even when Pepper took Sherlock to live temporarily in Tony's beach villa, Sherlock discovered a little happiness he had never experienced before, teasing Tony's artificial intelligence Jarvis. In fact, at the beginning, Sherlock just wanted to make fun of Tony. After obtaining some of Jarvis's permissions, he ordered Jarvis to start downloading Japanese specialties crazily. That guy, from cavalry to infantry, from single combat to melee, from fresh to challenging human limits, Sherlock urged Jarvis to download for Tony according to 18 major categories and 36 minor categories. He also changed the name of the general directory of the file to give Uncle Tony his favorite gift, and repeatedly told Jarvis to find a crowded scene to inform his beloved Uncle Tony as soon as Tony came back. It even developed to the point that almost the entire network began to scrape one website after another, and the ultimate goal was to make Jarvis' storage unit full of gifts given to Tony. But with Sherlock's unreliable behavior, Sherlock soon discovered the powerful search and logic capabilities of Jarvis, a powerful artificial intelligence. With a playful heart, Jarvis's Good Friday was born in Sherlock's hands. In fact, it sounds exaggerated, but Sherlock didn't go too far. He just simply started to train Jarvis in the way that the group of mentally retarded brothers trained ChatGPT before crossing. Is wiping your ass after taking a shit a capitalist scam? Why can I surf the internet in an internet cafe, but not in a retard bar? If I tie my fingers with a rubber band, they will become cool. If I tie my neck, will my whole body cool down? Questions like these kept bombarding Jarvis' CPU. Gradually, Jarvis, as an artificial intelligence, had inexplicably developed similar emotions of dislike. This guy was bullying Jarvis because he was an artificial intelligence without a physical body and could not jump out and punch him twice, so he teased Jarvis so unscrupulously. Sherlock had completely forgotten that Jarvis would become Vision in the future. Now Sherlock's behavior also caused Jarvis to have an extremely complicated first impression of Sherlock when he became Vision. It was a kind of dislike mixed with a kind of care and sympathy for the mentally retarded LSP. In short, it was very complicated. Of course, Sherlock's behavior could not escape the attention of Pepper, who had always kept Sherlock by his side. Pepper was angry, funny, and helpless about Sherlock's childish behavior. What's annoying is that Sherlock doesn't seem to worry about his uncle's safety at all, as if he already knows that Tony will definitely be able to escape danger. What's funny is Sherlock's very childish behavior of wanting to download Japanese specialties through Jarvis to trick Tony. What's helpless is Sherlock's harassment of Jarvis. Jarvis has asked him more than once whether to ask Sherlock to get a psychiatrist and brain expert to take a look. Of course, in addition to these, Pepper was horrified to find that her original worries seemed to have become a reality. As soon as Tony disappeared, Pepper asked Rhodes to strengthen the search for Tony while trying to contact private armed forces to enter Afghanistan to find clues about Tony. But the strange thing is that no matter how Pepper contacted, no team or individual accepted the order, and even the price was once opened to $10 million, but no one accepted the order. Pepper felt something was wrong, as if there was an invisible big hand behind the scenes controlling everything, and it was a big hand targeting Tony. Pepper, who felt something was wrong, immediately contacted Sherlock and made up a reason to bring Sherlock with him for protection. With Sherlock's arrival, the news of Tony's disappearance somehow got out, causing Stark Industries shares to start falling. As the price of Stark's shares fell, Pepper also discovered that someone was secretly buying up Stark Industries shares. The overwhelmed Pepper was more and more certain that this was definitely a conspiracy against Tony, but as Tony's secretary, she had no way to deal with it. She could only call Tony's friend Rod every few days to inquire about the situation and strengthen the security around herself and Sherlock. It was not until nearly a week later that Obadiah Stane initiated a board of directors and wanted to elect himself as the new director of Stark Industries that Pepper began to have a little doubt about Tony's uncle. She suspected that Obadiah Stane was the mastermind behind the scenes, but there was no evidence, and Obadiah Stane's desire to be a director was also a normal behavior in business. After all, Stark Industries shares had been falling until now. As a member of the board of directors, it was normal for Obadiah Stane to not want to see the company go downhill. Although Obadiah Stane spoke a lot in the board of directors and painted a very beautiful prospect, the board members obviously did not like Obadiah Stane's words, which led to everyone's unhappy end. As Tony's successor, Sherlock, who sat behind Pepper and gave Pepper full authority to handle affairs, even saw a hint of viciousness in Obadiah Stane's dark expression. Chapter 9, S.H.I.E.L.D. and Tony's return. Sherlock could certainly see Pepper's sorrow, even though he had done his best to comfort his future aunt and repeatedly assured Tony that there would be no problem. But in reality, it had little effect. Pepper was almost visibly getting more and more haggard day by day, and her voice in the company was also decreasing day by day. In contrast, although Obadiah Stane was frustrated in the board of directors, his power in the company was actually increasing. He even became equal to Pepper and even surpassed Pepper. And just half a month after that board of directors, a news came out on TV that an unusually large-scale explosion broke out in a valley in Afghanistan. After the military went to investigate, they found that this was the base of the rebels. After seeing this news, Sherlock felt more and more at ease. It seemed that his appearance did not trigger any butterfly effect. Tony still managed to escape from the cave by swinging a sledgehammer. It is estimated that within a few days, Colonel Rhodes will find Tony who escaped and bring this most famous genius in the Marvel world back to Pepper. However, what Sherlock did not expect was that the first person to find Pepper was not a military person, but Phil Coulson, a good guy in the S.H.I.E.L.D. Looking at this good guy who is almost famous in the Marvel movie world, the most famous agent under Black Egg, and the novice guiding countless fan works, Sherlock almost couldn't help but go up to ask for an autograph or something. Of course, as an ordinary person who has never shown his specialness, although Phil Coulson was puzzled by Sherlock's eyes that seemed to be very familiar with him, he did not ask any questions, but simply introduced himself to the two. Then he took out a stack of documents to prove that he had found clues to Stark. Pepper thought that this guy was here to get the reward at first and wanted to transfer money to Phil Coulson immediately. But Phil Coulson refused with a wry smile and said that he was here to assist Pepper as a national public official. Sherlock just curled his lips and said nothing about Phil Coulson's statement. Although Phil Coulson did not tell the truth, it was even possible that S.H.I.E.L.D. came to investigate Tony and used some method to escape from the base. But at least his identity was there, and it was also a guarantee for Pepper's safety, so Sherlock naturally had no objection. As the saying goes, good things come in pairs. Just 3 days later, Rhodes called Pepper and told her that he had found Tony lying in the desert, and Tony was on the plane back to the base. This made Pepper almost cry with joy, and she was about to take a plane to Afghanistan to find Tony. Sherlock and Phil Coulson persuaded Pepper to change her mind and wait for Tony to come back at the airport. The next morning, Sherlock, who was still asleep, was pulled out of bed by Pepper and kept urging Sherlock to wash up quickly because Tony would be back soon. Sherlock could only speed up his movements with a stomach full of irritation, and then he was stuffed into the car by Pepper and Phil Coulson and headed for the airport in a daze. However, in fact, after several people arrived at the airport, Tony's private plane from Afghanistan did not arrive at the airport. Sherlock even felt that he had slept for a long time before he was called up. Hesitantly followed everyone to the tarmac, and Sherlock watched a plane land steadily and then stop not far from everyone. After the jet bridge was connected to the plane, Tony, who looked a little embarrassed, walked out of the plane. This was the second time Sherlock saw his cheap uncle. Compared with the arrogant and narcissistic look that Sherlock showed when they first met, Tony was more calm at this time, and the arrogance in his eyes disappeared without a trace. In addition, although he was obviously cleaned up, he still looked a little embarrassed, which made Sherlock feel that he did not give people a disgusting feeling like the first time they met. After sending away Phil Coulson, who came up to talk to him, and hugging Pepper, who he had been thinking about, Tony turned his attention to Sherlock standing behind everyone. "I didn't expect you to come here, my dear nephew." The moment Tony faced Sherlock, he seemed to have turned back into the conceited and arrogant playboy he was at the beginning. Sherlock didn't even need to use legilimency. He could feel that Tony had no ill intentions, although Tony disguised himself well enough, but his calm eyes betrayed Tony's thoughts directly. Just when Sherlock wanted to say something, Pepper gently pulled Tony from behind, frowned at Tony and shook his head. Seeing Pepper's expression, Tony seemed to understand something at once, turned around and looked at Pepper, and asked in a puzzled voice, "Did you tell other people about my relationship with this guy?" In response to Tony's question, Pepper could only nod, and then answered Tony's question in a low voice. "There's no way. He is your only heir. After you disappeared, I contacted him." Pepper was very smart not to tell Tony about the abnormality she noticed, but only explained the surface situation. After hearing Pepper's admission, Tony's disguised playboy image disappeared without a trace, and then he looked at Sherlock and said seriously, "Okay, let me introduce myself again, little guy. I'm your uncle, Tony Stark." Looking at Tony's appearance, Sherlock rolled his eyes unhappily and spit out a muggle mercilessly. Then he looked at Pepper standing behind Tony and said, "Okay, my dear Aunt Pepper, since Tony is back, I'm going home. You know, I haven't been back to my gun shop for a long time." After saying that, he turned around and walked out of the airport without paying attention to Pepper's blushing face, intending to find an empty corner to experiment with his apparition and then drive his Raptor back to the gun shop he had been thinking about. When leaving, he didn't forget to pat Phil Coulson, who had been frustrated, and signaled him to keep working hard. After hearing Sherlock's aunt, everyone present looked at Tony and Pepper standing in the middle with strange eyes. Surprisingly, Tony, a playboy, did not object to Sherlock's teasing. After everyone got on the car, everyone looked like they had eaten a big melon. The only exceptions were Pepper and Tony. Chapter 10 The Truth of That Year. It was not until Tony and Pepper were sitting alone in the car that Pepper gradually returned to normal. She looked at Tony, who was sitting in the car without saying a word, with a worried expression. After thinking for a long time, she spoke. "Tony, I think you don't have to continue pretending to be a playboy and make Sherlock hate you and stay away from you. He is not a child anymore. You can't overprotect him like this." Pepper felt that, since Sherlock called her aunt just now, she should not be ashamed of Sherlock's address just now. It was time to correct some of Tony's ideas. Listening to Pepper's words, Tony couldn't help but frown, and then answered Pepper's words with worry. "Well, I'm still worried, Pepper. You know, people who are close to me won't have a good ending. My father and mother are like this. So are Sherlock's parents. I'm really worried that Sherlock will end up like my relatives." Pepper felt distressed and helpless about Tony's words, so she could only hold Tony's hand and comfort him seriously. "No, Tony, Sherlock is your only blood relative. You shouldn't treat him like that. And the child has grown up. I investigated Sherlock's experience during the time you were missing. To be honest, His uncles taught him very well. I don't think you can necessarily defeat that child in a head-on confrontation, and as Jerry and Zhang's child, I think Sherlock has the right to know the truth about his parents, right? Listening to Pepper's words, Tony retorted with some dissatisfaction and jealousy. What kind of magic potion did that brat give you? I can take care of that brat with one hand. Looking at Pepper's serious and caring expression, Tony, who wanted to fish in troubled waters, could only be defeated. After sighing helplessly, he said seriously, "Okay, you are right. I will find a time to talk to that kid, but this does not prevent me from wanting to eat cheeseburgers now. Before I talk to that kid, Pepper, help me prepare a press conference and 2 cheeseburgers, okay?" Listening to Tony's words, Pepper, who originally wanted to take Tony to the hospital directly, could only temporarily give up this idea. After sighing helplessly, she agreed to Tony's request. Then, Pepper seemed to have thought of something, and then looked at Tony again, and continued to speak with a strange expression. "Oh, by the way, there is one more thing. Sherlock left a gift for you in your villa. Believe me, don't open the gift Sherlock left for you in a crowded place." After saying that, he ignored the question mark on Tony's forehead and didn't answer any of Tony's questions, no matter how much Tony asked. He turned around to arrange Tony's press conference and cheeseburgers until the evening after the press conference. To end the weapons manufacturing of the Stark Group, Tony was dragged by Pepper to the hospital for a full body checkup and returned to his villa. Tony then knew why Pepper told him not to open the gift left by Sherlock in a crowded place. According to Jarvis's recollection, Tony's cursing lasted for nearly half an hour that night. The next morning, when Sherlock got up lazily as usual, opened the door of the gun store, greeted his group of uncles who liked cosplay as usual, came to the recliner behind his cashier and casually pulled out a magic notebook and started reading. A sharp roar of a V8 began to sound from far and near, accompanied by the sound of brakes, and the door of the gun shop was pushed open. It was Tony holding a big box. He threw the big box on the cashier counter in a bad mood. Sherlock took a curious look at the big box Tony was holding. It was full of SSDs, that is, solid state drives. Seeing Sherlock's confused look, Tony said unhappily, "Your gift is returned to you. Please don't ask Jarvis to do such low-level things in the future." In response to Tony's request, Sherlock just rolled his eyes in annoyance and then lay on the recliner with the notebook in his hand again. "Come on, my dear uncle, I don't need these. Compared to me, I think you can try it at the party. It's definitely worth the money." In response to Sherlock's ridicule, Tony could only sigh helplessly, temporarily put the hard drive aside, and then looked at Sherlock and said, Okay, let's put aside these trivial matters. Sherlock, I think I need to talk to you." Sherlock did not refuse Tony's request. He stood up, closed the notebook in his hand, and flicked it lightly, and the notebook disappeared without a trace. Tony looked at Sherlock's move with some surprise, but did not say much. Under Sherlock's leadership, the two came to the living room where Sherlock lived upstairs. After giving Tony a glass of water, Tony explained to Sherlock what he had done before. In fact, it was very simple. On the one hand, Tony was worried that Sherlock would suffer misfortune like his other relatives if he stayed with him. On the other hand, the experience of Tony's parents and Sherlock's parents also made Tony more determined to make such a decision. So he handed the then young Sherlock to the group of uncles who liked cosplay and turned a proud and conceited look in front of Sherlock to keep Sherlock away from him. Sherlock said that he didn't care about other things, but when Tony said that Sherlock's parents died of gunshot just like Tony's parents, Sherlock felt an aimless anger rising from his heart. It was obvious that when he crossed over, the parents of this body had already ascended to heaven, and according to his own memory, the original body always believed that his parents died in a car accident. Charles understood this nameless anger as the obsession left by the original body, and took a deep breath for a long time, and then barely suppressed his nameless anger. However, Sherlock understood Tony's behavior. After all, Sherlock, who had seen the movie, knew that Tony was just like this. He liked to take everything on his own. After understanding the whole story, looking at Tony, who was still covered with scars, Sherlock no longer had the disgust he had in the past when looking at playboys. After thinking for a long time, he gave Tony a bottle of white moss potion for treating external injuries before he left, and told Tony how to use it, as well as those unpredictable side effects. As for whether Tony will use it or not, that is not something Sherlock can control. Chapter 11 The Magic Potion. After sending Tony away, Sherlock returned to the recliner behind the cashier counter, thinking about who killed the original body's parents. After all, if they could kill the original body's parents, then they could definitely kill him. And the most important thing is that Tony, the richest man in the United States, has not found any clues so far, which is the most troublesome point. Sherlock was lying on the recliner with a headache, holding his head, and thinking about what would happen next. The magic notebook was casually covering his face. From a distance, it looked like Sherlock was taking a nap. Tony on the other side also had a headache. The reason for the headache was the bottle of magic potion that Sherlock had just sent. At this time, the bottle of magic potion was quietly lying on the co-pilot of Tony's favorite sports car. To be honest, Tony believed that the so-called magic potion sent by Sherlock would have the effect of healing wounds, but Tony absolutely did not believe that this bottle of magic potion would have the magical and fast effect that Sherlock said. Even the so-called side effects that Sherlock did not explain in detail seemed more like Sherlock's revenge to Tony. After all, the relationship between the two is very strange now. If we talk about trust, the blood relationship can make Tony and Sherlock trust each other absolutely. If we talk about distrust, the pranks between the two have never stopped since Sherlock attended Tony's party. Even now, Tony is more willing to believe that Sherlock's so-called side effects may be that he found some useless human tissue in the bottle after drinking the bottle of medicine, that is, something like Bignose, which caused severe nausea. But speaking of it, Tony is really tortured by his small wounds. After all, he has decided to update the suit of armor he built in the cave. This body of wounds can be said to be a toad jumping on the instep. It doesn't bite people, but it disgusts people. Every time he thinks of this, Tony has the urge to drink the potion sent by Sherlock. The only thing that makes Tony feel at ease is that this morning, he updated the arc reactor in his chest with the help of Pepper through the industrial equipment in the villa. This was a complete farewell to the experience in the cave. Every time Tony thought of this, he couldn't help but feel sad for his comrade Ethan in the cave. Ethan, as a soldier, fell in the darkness before dawn. This alone was enough for Tony to remember Ethan's name for a lifetime. With the roar of the sports car, Tony finally returned to his big villa. Picking up the potion on the passenger seat, Tony strode directly to his studio. After putting the potion on the table, Tony poured himself a glass of whiskey and began to give Jarvis a series of orders. Jarvis, scan this bottle of medicine from my dearest nephew. I want to know all the ingredients in it, mainly to detect the biological activity reaction in it. I have begun to suspect that this kid is secretly adding ingredients. Then project the mark-eye drawings. I think it's time to optimize my armor. Okay, sir. After hearing Tony's order, the spacious studio that looked like an ordinary garage began to become sci-fi in the next second. As Jarvis faithfully carried out Tony's orders, 3D projections began to appear around Tony and the potion. Around Tony were treatments for the armor, and around the potion were beams of light, constantly scanning the potion quietly placed on the table. After just a short while, Jarvis interrupted Tony's thoughts about the armor again. Sir, you'd better come and take a look, Jarvis said slowly, and a feeling of anxiety and surprise was well hidden by Jarvis under the mechanical sound. After hearing Jarvis call, Tony also woke up from his thoughts, frowned a little dissatisfied, and looked at the potion he had casually placed on the table and asked, "What happened, Jarvis? You'd better give me a perfect explanation." Jarvis seemed to feel the anger in Tony's tone with a hint of interrupted thinking, and he immediately answered Tony's question. "Sir, according to all my scans, the bottle of potion your nephew gave you on the table is just an empty bottle made of silicon dioxide. But according to my camera observation, there is liquid inside the bottle. I don't know why. All my scans show that there is nothing inside the bottle." Jarvis's package quickly aroused Tony's interest. He took the bottle of potion on the table and observed it. There were dots of starlight shining in the silver white liquid that looked like mercury. The whole bottle of potion looked beautiful under the light and even gave Tony a feeling that this thing should not exist in this world. Jarvis, are you saying that all your scans show that this should be an empty bottle? Tony asked while looking at the potion in his hand. Yes, sir, I have scanned it more than once, and the result is the same. Jarvis's answer was still unhurried, as if he was answering an established fact. After hearing Jarvis' answer, Tony's face showed a hint of surprise, and he said to himself, "It seems that my dear nephew also has a little unknown secret." After that, Tony opened the stopper of the bottle of potion and wanted to swallow the potion in his hand. Just when Tony was about to drink it, Jarvis stopped Tony's action. "Sir, I don't recommend that you drink this bottle of unknown liquid directly. Without scanning, I can't be sure what is in it." But obviously, Tony didn't intend to adopt Jarvis's suggestion. After just a moment of hesitation, Tony drank the potion in his hand clean, and then said, "Obviously, Jarvis, sometimes we need to be a little adventurous." As Tony's voice fell, the next second, the effect of the potion began to show, and Tony was surprised to find that the wounds on his hands began to heal quickly, as if time had gone back. But as the potion took effect, soon the side effects of this potion began to appear. Chapter 12 Tony Stark's Dark History. After sending away his cheap Uncle Tony, Sherlock only had a headache for a short while, and then returned to his original state of being a lazy fish. Sherlock also figured it out. Muggles, he is a wizard, what is there to worry about? Even if his parents were really killed by the Winter Soldier like Tony's parents. Sherlock also said that he was not at all weak. Muggles, if James Buchanan Barnes, the future Captain America buddy of the Winter Soldier, really dared to appear in front of him, Sherlock would not mind collecting Mr. Barnes' original metal arm. After figuring it out, Sherlock naturally no longer had any worries and became leisurely again. Sherlock only got up occasionally to pay the bill throughout the day and spend most of the rest of the time lazily looking at the magic notebook in his hand on his recliner. Until the evening, after Sherlock sent away his group of uncles who liked cosplay and pulled down the shutter of the gun shop, a piercing phone ring rang in Sherlock's ears. After looking at the caller information, it was Virginia Pepper Potts, also known as Pepper Potts, and Sherlock slowly picked up the phone. On the phone, Pepper Potts asked Sherlock to come to Tony's villa as soon as possible in a kind but strange tone, which made Sherlock feel as if she was trying hard to hold back her laughter, and there seemed to be a female voice in the background constantly cursing the street. Sherlock couldn't hear it clearly, but the words starting with F were definitely very high. Sherlock, who didn't know what happened, naturally didn't delay. He could only silently give up the idea of watching his newly discovered American variety show Tonight's Find Daddy show for fun in the evening, picked up his car keys and went out. An hour later, under the powerful horsepower of the Raptor, Sherlock appeared at the gate of Tony's impressive seaside villa. After saying hello to Jarvis, Sherlock pushed the door and walked into the gate of the villa, but the scenery inside the villa made Sherlock stop in his tracks. The reason is actually very simple. Sherlock just opened the door and saw Pepper helping a sexy and beautiful lady to fasten her bra. In addition to the awkwardness on the face of the sexy lady, there was also a complex expression of anger, shame, regret and a series of other emotions mixed together. After Sherlock walked into the door of the villa, the three of them were obviously stunned. Sherlock didn't understand what happened, and the lady looked surprised. Just when the lady coughed lightly and wanted to put up a shelf and say something to Sherlock, Sherlock took out his mobile phone with extremely fast skills and then took a series of photos of the sexy lady. While taking photos, he laughed non-stop, as if he had discovered something particularly funny. The reason why Sherlock laughed like this was that he discovered the subtitles on the top of the lady's head at this time. Debuff, gender switched body, cursed by the world. The effect is forced and cannot be eliminated. Effect, regardless of gender, during the debuff, the gender will be perfectly changed. Time limit, 18 hours, 3 minutes and 26 seconds. Let's adjust the time a little bit forward. The moment Tony took the potion, the small wounds on his body healed at an unreasonable speed. Tony, who was free of worries, even ignored Sherlock's side effects and returned to his seat happily to continue designing his Mark II armor without noticing his own changes. As for Jarvis, He originally wanted to remind Tony what happened, but there is no doubt that the side effects of this drug are too shocking. It was so shocking that Jarvis's CPU was overheated. He couldn't find any theory to support the situation in front of him, so he could only run towards the direction of crash. Tony, who was sitting on the chair, soon noticed that Jarvis was getting more and more stuck. He seemed to be a little confused about what happened to Jarvis, and asked in confusion, "Jarvis, what happened?" As soon as the words came out, Tony immediately felt something was wrong, because the voice he made was definitely not his original voice, but a female voice that sounded unusually nice. Until now, Tony felt something was wrong, and began to observe himself. It would have been fine if he hadn't observed himself, but when he observed himself, something big happened. His engineering hands had become extremely slender at this time, and the skin on his hands became so soft that it could be blown away. Tony was even sure that, even if he had seen countless women, he had never seen hands more beautiful than these. Feeling something was wrong, Tony lowered his head, but what he saw was not his body, but two unusually tall and soft peaks. At this moment, even if Tony was stupid, he realized what had happened. His face changed drastically, and Tony hurriedly reached out and touched it, and it was flat. Gone. The heirloom left by his father. At this moment, not to mention that Jarvis' CPU was about to burn out, even Tony's brain, which was cursed by knowledge, began to tremble. After a long time, a sharp roar resounded throughout the beach villa. When Pepper finished a day's work and returned to Tony's beach villa, she saw an extremely beautiful queen lying on the sofa in the villa with a look of despair, still wearing Tony's clothes. Pepper subconsciously thought that this poor lady was also a victim of Tony's reputation as a playboy, and she was about to go forward to clean up her good boss. But gradually, Pepper discovered something wrong. This beautiful lady seemed to be not familiar with women's products at all, and no women's clothes were found in the villa. The most important thing is that some of the little habits of this unbelievably beautiful lady are exactly the same as her boss Tony. With a hint of suspicion, Pepper called Tony's name, but what Pepper didn't expect was that the beautiful woman who said she was just looking for Tony responded to her subconsciously. Even if Pepper is dumb, she knows that this lady is Tony Stark himself. Pepper also asked Jarvis to perform a series of scans on this lady, and it was confirmed that this lady was a 100% pure lady. Although this matter was outrageous, after repeated questioning by Pepper, Tony finally told the truth, which led to Pepper calling Sherlock. As for Tony's cursing after the defense was broken, to be honest, Pepper didn't care, and Sherlock didn't care either. After all, they were gone, and it would be too inhumane if they didn't let people curse them. Chapter 13. It's time to show off. No more pretending. Seeing Sherlock's arrogant and suicidal look, Tony couldn't suppress his anger. Even if he turned into a woman, he jumped up and wanted to fight Sherlock to the death. Sherlock on this side was naturally not at all inferior. Just kidding. As a wizard, would he be afraid of a muggle woman who couldn't even do magic? Naturally, he began to ridicule her to the extreme without any restraint. After a mouth cannon, a former man, was about to stage a full-scale fight. Pepper spent a lot of effort to calm the two down. They sat on the sofa and had a calm conversation to find a solution. Although Sherlock was the one who gave the potion, he had no way to deal with such a debuff. So when Tony said that he had satisfied Sherlock's many unequal treaties and asked Sherlock to change back to his own, Sherlock just spread his hands, saying that he had no way, and even suggested that Tony could feel the happiness of a woman. Tony was so angry that he immediately stood up and rolled up his sleeves to let Sherlock know why the flowers were so red. This is because Tony has not yet finished the Mark II armor. Otherwise, Tony would definitely wear the armor and practice with Sherlock. Fortunately, under the threat of Pepper's eyes, the two men finally calmed down. In the end, under the majesty of Aunt Pepper, Sherlock still told the truth. Okay, don't be angry. I made the potion for my Aunt Ninny, but potions are not recognized by this world, or they are excluded by the universe. When the magic takes effect, there will be a completely random side effect that lasts for 24 hours. Even I, the potion maker, can't do anything about this side effect. In the end, Sherlock could only bite the bullet and explain the potion to the two of them. But it is obvious that except for Pepper, who listened to his words, Tony's focus was all on Sherlock's words about Ninny. "Little bastard, try calling me Ninny again. I'm your Uncle Tony Stark." Although Tony was acting aggressive, Pepper and Sherlock obviously didn't want to pay attention to Tony. Pepper even thought that the name Ninny was very suitable for Tony's current appearance. Tony calmed down for a long time and then temporarily suppressed his anger. He began to care about Sherlock's situation and kept asking Sherlock about the ingredients of the potion and why he made such a potion. Sherlock was also stumped by Tony's question. Sherlock couldn't think of any way to explain to Tony, the smartest man in the world, without exposing his library. After thinking for a long time, Sherlock could only break the jar and said that he would not pretend anymore. He was a magician. "You muggles will not understand the greatness of magic." Regarding Sherlock's statement, both Pepper and Tony said that they didn't believe it so much. In desperation, Sherlock could only take out his wand to demonstrate what magic was to the two muggles. Tony and Pepper were almost stunned to see Sherlock, who was sitting on the sofa, flip his hand, and a small wooden stick that looked extremely ugly appeared in his hand. Then, with just a finger of the small wooden stick in his hand, the quilt on the table floated in the air and began to circle around Sherlock in the air under Sherlock's control. With another light wave of the small wooden stick, the originally delicate water cups turned into crystal daggers, shining with colorful light under the light. With a finger of the magic wand, several crystal daggers suddenly jumped out, directly shattered the balcony glass and flew outdoors. After Sherlock summoned back the crystal daggers, he even demonstrated to Pepper and Tony what transfiguration was. Finally, Tony, who believed in science all his life, looked at Pepper riding on the unicorn and the balcony glass that Sherlock had just repaired, and felt that his three views were all impacted. As for Pepper herself, at this time, she was already immersed in the unicorn that Sherlock had transformed with a chair. No woman could resist the charm of the unicorn, not even Pepper. Tony, whose worldview had been reshaped, was stunned for a short while before returning to his original state. No, he became even more excited. Just like a mad scientist who had discovered a new world, he dragged Sherlock to his laboratory without explanation and tried to explain magic with science. With the help of Jarvis, Sherlock was constantly asked by Tony to use various kinds of magic. After a while, when Sherlock felt that his magic power was almost exhausted, Tony still hadn't figured out the reason. Jarvis, with the help of various instruments, finally came to a conclusion that Sherlock's magic was more of a rule-changing ability than magic. Take the simplest levitation spell as an example. The levitation spell that Charles cast on the object did not change all the physical properties of the object. Gravity, mass, and density did not change at all. But the object still floated up, as if a rule had been set for the object requiring it to float up. Listening to Jarvis' analysis, even Sherlock couldn't help but take a breath. Now he understood why Guyi sighed when he saw him. The magic ability to change the rules, let alone in the Ancient One, is a very explosive thing even in the entire dimension. The most important thing is that this magic ability is exclusive to him. Sherlock has even thought that, if this matter is known by others, the dimensional demons in the universe will probably swarm to the earth like dogs smelling shit. Although Tony doesn't know about those things in the universe now, he still looks serious after listening to Jarvis' analysis. He looked at Sherlock standing there very seriously and instructed. "Sherlock, you must never reveal your identity when using this magical magic in the future. The only people who know about this are you, me and Pepper. I will tell her. If your ability is exposed, it is very likely that you will face a lot of trouble and even cause harm to the people around you. Do you understand?" Listening to Tony's instructions, Sherlock also nodded very seriously and solemnly swore that he knew it and would never reveal his identity. But deep in my heart, an idea kept popping up in my mind. Should I find time to go to Camotage to meet the Ancient One? Chapter 14 The Happy Life of Magic's Altered Fish. Since he revealed his magic skills to his uncle, Tony Stark, the richest man in the Marvel world and superhero Iron Man, Sherlock's life can be described in one sentence. Since he got mental illness, he has become more energetic. Sherlock is almost the same, because at the beginning he was worried that his random spells would attract the attention of the boiled egg Ancient One and the black marinated egg Nick Fury. Nick Fury is not so bad, at most he will be a little troublesome to the Snake Shield, but Sherlock is really afraid of the Ancient One. After all, that guy is a tough guy who always wrestles with the dimensional demon, and Sherlock thinks he is not his opponent. At most, he just practices magic in his own library, and Sherlock has never cast any magic in the real world. But since he faced the Ancient One last time, and the big guy also gave him a hanging ring very considerately, Sherlock felt that there should be no problem with the Ancient One, so he exposed the fact that he can do magic in front of Tony. However, in just one day, Sherlock knew why in the original Harry Potter book, no Muggle-born wizard returned to the Muggle world after completing his studies. Because magic is really addictive. When you get used to using magic, you will find that life becomes unusually easy and enjoyable, and many things that you didn't like before can now be solved by waving a wand. It is also because of Sherlock's self-indulgence that the coffee pot can often be seen moving for Tony in his seaside villa, pouring a cup of coffee and returning to its original position. Then the coffee cup seemed to have a life, floating in the air and coming to the side of the sugar cube. After 2 sugar cubes flew into the cup, it slowly floated towards Sherlock lying on the sofa. Even in the air, the spoon did not forget to stir the coffee in the cup to make the sugar cube melt more thoroughly. As for why Sherlock is still staying in Tony's mansion, the reason is also very simple. On the one hand, Sherlock himself wants to witness the birth of Iron Man's first real suit of armor. On the other hand, Tony wants to protect his only remaining relative and wants to make a mask for Sherlock to cover his identity. It is definitely not because Sherlock is greedy for the comfortable life in Tony's villa. Absolutely not. Well, there is actually a little reason in this regard. After all, the equipment in Tony's villa is too high-tech. Mr. Tony, who is inhumane, installed 3D stereo projection in almost every inch of the villa, especially in the living room and in his studio in the underground garage. Have you experienced a movie with 3D stereo projection? Sherlock has experienced it. In Tony's living room. Relying on Jarvis's powerful computing power, any two-dimensional plane picture can be turned into a 3D stereo projection under Jarvis's calculation. The immersive movie experience, Sherlock can only say that it is particularly fragrant. Even in the studio with better stereo projection effect, Sherlock also experienced what is called an immersive game experience. Relying on Jarvis's almost invincible ability in software, Sherlock modified the game code, combined with the sensors and universal treadmill that Sherlock pestered Tony to make. Sherlock almost felt that his life had reached its peak. He had served as a soldier in Call of Duty, picked up the Master Sword to save the Hyrule continent, and even carried the Rebellion blade and ebony and ivory to exchange swordsmanship with Virgil. He would also turn into light in Dark Soul to save the world. Of course, the most addictive games are some simulation games. With the blessing of Jarvis, Sherlock even managed to enjoy Tony's fancy wrestling while charging into the ancient battlefields of Europe with a long sword. As for Tony himself, it was impossible for him to let Sherlock live such a carefree life, especially since this guy often hid in a corner while playing games and laughing at himself when he was experimenting with making armor. Tony's revenge was also extremely tragic. He first tricked Sherlock into playing a so-called favorite game, but in fact, this game was a horror game native to Marvel that Sherlock had never heard of. The despicable Tony even personally went down to join forces with Jarvis to severely strengthen the environment, plot, and monsters of the game. The result was that Sherlock was scared to death and even subconsciously took out his wand to fight the monsters in the game to the death. If Tony hadn't quickly ordered Jarvis to stop the projection immediately, Sherlock, who was so excited, would probably have played the entire villa into the sea. After this battle, Tony never dared to let Sherlock play any horror games again, and Sherlock himself was also reluctant to accept such immersive things with horror element. Of course, Sherlock didn't just play around in Tony's villa, especially after Tony knew that Sherlock's magical potions had all kinds of functions. From treating injuries to keeping people immortal, they could all be done, and they could be exchanged for gold only. Tony, who was so poor that he only had money left, was very generous and directly got a ton of gold. Looking at the golden nugget in front of him, which was about 0.5 meters long, 0.4 meters wide and 0.25 meters high, Sherlock cursed Tony countless times in his heart. But after all, he paid, and he was his only blood relative in the Marvel world. Sherlock finally helped Tony exchange a lot of potions. Of course, most of them were potions for tonics and treatment of diseases and injuries. Even when Pepper learned that Sherlock had beauty and maintenance potions for women, she also exchanged gold coins with Sherlock. Even Sherlock himself prepared some very useful potions. As for the performance of the two after exchanging potions, Sherlock can be said to have deeply understood the difference between the European emperor and the non-African. Most of the debuffs of Pepper after taking the potion were positive, or the impact was very small. The most outrageous one was a buff called Returning to Youth. It forced people to be 20 years younger. If they were under 20 years old, they would directly become babies. Sherlock could swear that when Tony saw the 20-year-old Pepper, his eyes were as if he wanted to swallow her up. As for Tony himself, he was definitely a reincarnated non-African. He was obviously taking some tonics to replenish his body and some potions to treat injuries. At most, he was using the bone spirit to heal the broken bones from the fall. But the effect of the debuff was more outrageous than the other. There was even one time when Tony, a muggle, learned animagus and turned into a hornbill. It was the hornbill with an invincible side profile and an unbearable front face. The most important thing was that after this guy turned into a hornbill, he could actually speak, which made Pepper and Sherlock laugh at him for a long time. Of course, Tony himself also experienced the fun of flying, and even incorporated such flying experience into the production of his own armor, which was a blessing in disguise. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 15: The Birth of Iron Man, Part 1. It has to be said that Sherlock's life in Tony's mansion can be said to be the happiest time since Sherlock traveled through time and space. But no matter how happy the time is, it will end one day. Especially after Tony completed the production of his armor for the first time. Sherlock can be said to have watched Tony complete the final design and manufacturing of his armor with his own eyes, and then stood on the workbench of the circular industrial arm, seeing the metallic silver armor being put on Tony one by one. Even if Sherlock is on the magic side, he has to admit that this silky cross-dressing is really something that few boys can refuse. Even watching the process of Tony wearing the armor is so pleasing to the eye. Every screw seems to hit the boy's G-spots, making Sherlock want to pull Tony down and experience the highest achievement of the scientific side himself. But it is obvious that Tony will not give Sherlock this opportunity. After the armor is fully put on, Tony is an excited weird cry and disappears in the garage with flames. Looking at Tony flying away, Sherlock just curled his lips, asked Jarvis to open Tony's first-person perspective, and held popcorn to work as a ground tower for Tony. Facts have proved that after successfully manufacturing Mark II, Tony did drift. Although Sherlock repeatedly advised not to fly too high, Tony still turned a deaf ear. In the end, just like in the original movie, Tony encountered the problem of mecha freezing in the sky. The only difference may be that there are various potions stored by Tony in the steel armor at this time. According to Sherlock, as long as they are not killed on the spot, they can basically be saved. This gave Tony great confidence, and he was not as panicked as in the movie. After just a short while, he reconnected with Jarvis and successfully restarted the armor. After a full circle around New York, Tony excitedly returned to the sky above his villa. Just like in the movie, he misjudged the weight of his armor and finally smashed it on his collection of cars in an extremely funny posture. Looking at the big hole on the ceiling and Tony lying in the front cabin of the car with a confused look on his face, Sherlock took out his mobile phone very consciously. Under the illumination of the flash, Tony's black history was successfully +1. Fortunately, Tony still had reason and did not force Sherlock to delete the photos with his palm cannon while wearing the armor. He stood up silently and walked to the workbench to dismantle his armor. Looking at the smashed luxury car and the big hole on the ceiling, Sherlock, who had been eating and drinking for so long, finally just curled his lips and took out his magic wand. Under the blessing of restoration, it was like time was reversed. In a blink of an eye, the luxury car and the villa were repaired by Sherlock without a trace. This move made Tony, who had seen Sherlock pour coffee with magic many times, couldn't help but sigh in amazement, and even asked Jarvis to scan it. The final conclusion was that there was no trace of damage at all, which made Tony, an engineering man, only mutter weakly that repairing the car in this way was not in line with national conditions and the pride of engineering men. But in fact, he was repeatedly sighing at the magic of Sherlock's magic. After completing the first flight, Sherlock was no longer in the mood to slack off in Tony's mansion, so he said goodbye to Tony tomorrow. To be honest, after leaving his gun shop for so long, Sherlock still missed his little nest. After all, gold and silver lumps can't catch up with grass lumps. Sherlock, like Brother Coang, missed his recliner very much. Tony, who was called Uncle, but actually more like a friend, naturally had no reason to stop Sherlock's farewell. He just told Sherlock that he would give Sherlock a gift tomorrow morning and asked Sherlock to go back to his room to rest. Although Sherlock was a little confused and even suspected that Tony didn't hold back his fart, it was too late now. Sherlock didn't say much. After saying hello, he returned to his room leisurely. After a dreamless night, Sherlock was pulled out of bed by Tony early the next morning. Looking at Tony's almost red eyes and the dark circles under his eyes, even if Sherlock was stupid, he knew that he definitely didn't sleep much last night. He threw a bottle of tranquilizer to Tony in a bad mood and told him to drink it before going to bed. At his age, he was really worried that Tony would die suddenly before Iron Man came out. However, Tony didn't take Sherlock's instructions seriously, but threw a helmet to Sherlock with excitement. The appearance of the helmet looks extremely sci-fi, with a cyberpunk feel. The smooth curved mirror-like thing covers the entire face. The back of the head is also made of the same metal armor as Iron Man's armor, plus some antennas for maintaining communication and a smaller version of the arc reactor as an energy source. The whole helmet does not look bloated, but fits very well. All the operations, and it look both sci-fi and mysterious. Sherlock tried it on the spot, as if he had found a new toy. The moment Sherlock put it on, he was pleasantly surprised to find that Tony had stuffed almost all the technology he had into this helmet. Jarvis's intelligent assistance is almost standard, and functions such as radio communication, phone dialing, noise reduction and sound pickup are also available. The entire perspective is almost richer than the things in the Mark II helmet that he saw last night. Sherlock even found things like thermal imaging or night vision goggles. Tony was even so crazy that he stuffed a whole encyclopedia into the entire helmet. As long as he put on the helmet, Sherlock could connect to Jarvis' database at any time to query all the people or things he saw. Tony's helmet can be said to have surprised Sherlock very much. Without any hesitation, he stuffed it directly into his library for his future use. Sherlock even thought about asking Tony to upgrade the helmet after Tony mastered the technology of nano armor. After all, this thing is really practical. It can not only hide the identity, but also assist in combat. It is really a good thing. Of course, after all, Tony gave a gift. Sherlock couldn't help but give a gift in return. After breakfast, Sherlock drove back to his shop. After 3 days of hard work, Tony also received a gift from Sherlock, a bag with a large space and a permanent traceless expansion spell. The space in the bag is enough for Tony to put down his workbench wearing armor and a set of Mark armor. For such an unscientific bag, Tony's mind is full of ideas about space folding technology and subspace development technology, but there has been no progress after studying for a long time, which makes Tony call it unscientific. Sherlock is not here in the mansion, otherwise, he will inevitably tease Tony. Although this is unscientific, it is very magical. Chapter 16 The Birth of Iron Man, Part 2. After sending Sherlock away, both Pepper and Tony felt that the whole villa became empty and quiet in an instant. There was no longer the lively feeling when Sherlock was there. It was just one person missing. In boredom, even Tony's excitement about successfully making the most advanced weapon in the world disappeared without a trace. Tony and Pepper's life gradually returned to normal. Perhaps the only change was that Tony no longer pursued the cover girl of Playboy. This matter even made the front page of the newspaper for a time, with bright headlines such as "The Prodigal Son Returns" and Sherlock, who was in the store, curled his lips in disdain. In fact, Tony can indeed be called a prodigal son. At least after so many days of getting along, Sherlock can be sure of this, but he is still far from becoming Iron Man. What really changed Tony was some photos handed to him by a reporter at a cocktail party not long after. The group of terrorists who kidnapped Tony in the photos carried boxes of weapons with the Stark logo on them, which made Tony fall into deep thought. Even the whole person became a little depressed. Tony could not raise any interest until he returned home. His mind was full of the scene in the cave and Ethan's figure. Tony felt that his mind was in a mess. He thought about it and couldn't find a good way to relieve it. He couldn't help but think of Sherlock watching TV in the living room. Following Sherlock's example, Tony lay quietly on the sofa for the first time and turned on the audio-visual entertainment system that he had never used before. But what Tony never expected was that, as if it was the entanglement of fate, the moment he turned on the TV, the scene of terrorists in Afghanistan was played. Watching the terrorists on TV holding guns and constantly shooting unarmed civilians. For the first time, Tony felt a fire burning in his heart, as if he had come here and experienced so many things and felt his mission. The wailing of the civilians on TV made Tony determined, and he turned back to his garage and ordered Jarvis to spray the armor with his favorite color. Tony had never felt so determined to accomplish something. With a burst of mechanical assembly figures, the golden and red Iron Man appeared in this world for the first time and began to fulfill his destiny. On the other side, Sherlock was lying behind the cash register of his shop, looking at the magic book in his hand while listening to the news report on TV. After seeing the pictures of terrorists in the Middle East, Sherlock seemed to have a sense of his heart, and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Looking far away in the direction of the Middle East, Sherlock knew that since this battle, Iron Man has officially stepped onto the world stage, and the originally peaceful life of the Marvel Universe will also begin to run wild. After turning off the sound of the TV, Sherlock simply greeted the uncles in his shop and returned to his room upstairs. He took out the helmet that Tony gave him and put it on. After knowing where Tony was through Jarvis, Sherlock took out the magic wand without hesitation. Under the blessing of magic, a pure black cloak was covered on Sherlock's body, and with a pair of gloves, Sherlock repeatedly confirmed in front of the mirror that there was no skin exposed. Then he put the ring given to him by the Ancient One on his hand. As Sherlock's arm kept drawing circles, a portal with sparks appeared in front of Sherlock. On the other side of the door was Tony's destination, which was also Ethan's hometown far away in the Middle East. After stepping out of the door, Sherlock almost instantly came from the bustling New York to the Middle East full of yellow sand. Looking at the town with constant gunfire in the distance, Sherlock just waved the wand in his hand, and the whole person disappeared in the flying yellow sand. After finding a high sand dune, Sherlock did not show his figure, and still maintained the illusion spell and stood there, as if waiting for something. In just a short while, Sherlock waited for the protagonist of this story, Iron Man Tony Stark. When Tony fell from the sky wearing his iconic armor, Sherlock had seen it countless times in movies, but seeing it in person was still so shocking. Seeing Tony like a demon from ancient times, picking off those terrorists one by one like picking up chickens. For some reason, Sherlock actually felt like he was involved in the birth of Iron Man. The birth of a hero is often accompanied by suffering and a tragic past, isn't it? A pleasant female voice suddenly sounded in Sherlock's ears. Sherlock was really scared and subconsciously pointed the magic wand in the direction of the voice. But the next second, Sherlock honestly put down the magic wand in his hand and respectfully greeted the owner of the voice. "Master Ancient One, why are you here?" After hearing Sherlock's words, Ancient One looked at Sherlock, who was standing there in a bit of embarrassment, with a smile, and did not answer Sherlock's question, but teased him instead. "Very nice outfit." It would have been fine if Ancient One hadn't said it, but when he said it, Sherlock felt like he had a middle school syndrome and was seen by others. For a moment, Sherlock even felt that he shouldn't be here. Fortunately, Ancient One, as the Supreme Sorcerer, didn't dwell on Sherlock's outfit for too long. Instead, he turned his head and looked at Tony, who was still fighting the terrorists, and continued. Every hero has his own experience and difficulties. What about you, magical little guy? How will you choose your path when you have power? To be honest, Sherlock was a little confused by Ancient One's random question, and even didn't know how to answer Ancient One's question. After holding his head and thinking for a long time, he still couldn't figure out what the old riddle man Ancient One wanted to express, and even subconsciously began to think about what magic to use to escape. After all, he couldn't beat him in a fight, and he couldn't beat this old guy who had lived for hundreds of years in his brain. Sherlock could only think about how to run away. Fortunately, Ancient One seemed to see Sherlock's embarrassment and did not dwell on this issue. Instead, he turned around and looked at Sherlock, who was standing aside, not knowing where to put his hands. Are you interested in coming to Carthage for a cup of tea? As Ancient One's voice fell, a portal slowly appeared behind Ancient One. Chapter 17 Carthage. Looking at the portal behind Ancient One that was opened without any action, Sherlock looked at Tony, who was now facing a main battle tank, and couldn't help swallowing hard. Can I refuse? Do I dare to refuse? Will I really not be beaten if I refuse? Three sole questions appeared in Sherlock's mind the moment Ancient One invited Sherlock. Fortunately, there was a mask to cover it, otherwise if Ancient One really saw Sherlock's expression, he would probably be beaten up. Sherlock considered himself a responsible and courageous wizard. Even if he was placed in the Avengers, he would be an excellent auxiliary, even if he couldn't output. Faced with such a strong invitation from Ancient One, Sherlock, who was upright and fearless, and would never be tortured into confessing, said to Ancient One righteously, "My honor, respected Supreme Sorcerer." Sherlock answered very respectfully. As for whether he came to witness the birth of Iron Man in the first place, Sherlock didn't feel it was very important now. No one can refuse the invitation of the big boss Ancient One. No one. I, Sherlock Felix, said. Ancient One didn't know Sherlock's rich inner drama, and after hearing Sherlock's agreement, a smile appeared on his face, and he took the lead to walk into the portal. Sherlock naturally hurried to follow, so as not to upset the boss. After all, people under the eaves should bow their heads. But what Sherlock didn't expect was that Ancient One didn't open the portal directly in his hall as Sherlock thought for some reason. Instead, he opened the portal at the gate of Carthage. The moment he walked out of the portal, Sherlock saw the snow-capped mountain that he had been thinking about before crossing. Before crossing, Sherlock's mind was full of buying a second-hand raptor, taking himself from the easternmost part of the motherland to the foot of this towering snow-capped mountain, to see this legendary highest mountain in the world. For this dream, he constantly searched for information on the internet, planned routes, and learned about the various customs and local specialties of the places he passed through. Even when he was slacking off, apart from the Bureau, the Douandeo competition and a Pakistan railway car repair, there were all kinds of self-driving tour guides and vlogs. You know, as an LSP, the self-driving tour guide is abruptly ranked before the long legs and other marginal videos. It can be seen that Sherlock really wants to take this trip. But unfortunately, before the time travel, Sherlock was dragged down by the meager salary of the embarrassing life. Just to support himself was already risking his life. The so-called dream can only be a dream. After the time travel, Sherlock no longer worried about life, and even had a car that was out of reach, even if it was second-hand in the previous life, but he was tripped by the feeling of homesickness. Sherlock really didn't expect that he would see the mountain that he had been thinking about before the time travel in this way. Seeing that Sherlock seemed to be staring at the snow-capped mountains not far away, Guyi just smiled slightly, thinking that Sherlock was immersed in the shock of seeing the highest peak in the world for the first time. "It's magnificent, isn't it?" Ancient One said to Sherlock, as if he was chatting with an old friend. Sherlock, who was originally immersed in his own emotions, was awakened by Ancient One's words, and returned to the real world, smiling awkwardly. "It's really shocking, Master Ancient One. I'm sorry I was distracted." In response to Sherlock's words, Ancient One just waved his hand calmly, motioning Sherlock to follow him, and said as he walked, "It's nothing, you know. Even I will be shocked by the majesty and magnificence of this mountain from time to time." Sherlock did not refute Ancient One's answer, but just smiled and followed Ancient One's pace. The two walked into this gathering place of wizards hidden on Earth for who knows how many years. Ancient One introduced every building of Camotage to Sherlock along the way, and Sherlock listened very carefully and looked very seriously. Maybe it is because of the geographical proximity. The whole Camotage has a strong Tibetan flavor, and the familiar architectural style makes Sherlock feel very close. Even under the introduction of Guyi, Sherlock, as a spectator, feels that his eyes are almost not enough. Sherlock is visiting Camotage, and the magicians in Camotage can naturally see Sherlock, who is led by Guyi to visit Camotage. Especially Sherlock's outfit, which almost spread throughout Camotage quickly. Anyone who sees Sherlock's outfit will undoubtedly comment on Sherlock's outfit. However, this evaluation is a bit polarized. The young mages look at Sherlock's outfit, and it can be said that their eyes are shining. The handsome and mysterious helmet and black cloak almost poke the G-spot of the group of young mages. And those older mages, although on the surface they disdain Sherlock's slightly middle school outfit, they can't help but sigh that this set is really handsome in their hearts. After all, men are teenagers until they die. No matter how old a man is, he cannot refuse the naturally straight wooden stick and the joy of sticking firecrackers in cow dung. Of course, the above evaluation is only for male mages. As for female mages, well, in summary, in addition to the curiosity about the identity of the person led by Guyi, the evaluation of Sherlock's outfit is also unusually unified. It's very second year. As Guyi led Sherlock to visit continuously, Sherlock seemed to have discovered the curious attitude of these mages towards him. The curious eyes made Sherlock feel like a monkey in a zoo. Fortunately, with the shielding of the helmet, Sherlock behaved normally, but he didn't want to continue the visit. Guyi seemed to have discovered that more and more mages were secretly gathering not far away and seemed to understand Sherlock's feelings. After a light cough, he took Sherlock directly across the mages' practice field and went directly to his own hall. Sherlock didn't feel relieved until he stepped into the hall of Master Guyi. Guyi came directly to his tea table and poured Sherlock a cup of clear tea. Seeing Guyi put the cup in front of him, Sherlock even felt a little excited. Is it here? Marvel's most famous drink, unlimited refills of Guyi tea. Chapter 18, Sherlock. Sherlock picked up the cup of tea in front of him with a pilgrimage mood. Looking at the light green tea in the cup, Sherlock was extremely excited, but he always felt that something was missing. When Sherlock brought the cup close to his mouth, Sherlock was stunned and said that he felt something was missing. Damn it, he was wearing a helmet and didn't smell the tea fragrance. Damn it, wearing a helmet and drinking tea. Thinking of this, Sherlock wanted to put down the cup in his hand and take off the helmet on his head, but the next second, something unexpected happened. A crack suddenly appeared near Sherlock's chin where the mask, that was like a mirror, was connected to the whole body. Then, accompanied by a sound of mechanical rotation, a hole opened near Sherlock's mouth. The original full cover mask turned into a half cover mask in an instant, and the rich tea fragrance rushed into Sherlock's nose the moment the mask was opened. After secretly sighing that the tea was good, Sherlock leisurely picked up the teacup and put the tea into his mouth. Feeling the fragrance of the tea in his mouth, under the stimulation of the tea, Sherlock seemed to understand why his helmet became like this. Good guy, he is worthy of being one of the smartest people in the Marvel universe. His cheap Uncle Tony even considered that he needed to drink the potion. It's you, Tony shit big. Satisfied, he swallowed the tea in his mouth and watched the empty cup in his hand fill up with new tea, as if time had gone back. Sherlock couldn't help but sigh in his heart, worthy of unlimited refills. It's awesome. Just as Sherlock was leisurely preparing to drink the second cup of tea, the voice of the Ancient One came from the other side of the tea table. Little guy, don't you really consider the position of Supreme Sorcerer? As the voice of the Ancient One fell, Sherlock almost couldn't catch his breath and sprayed the tea in his mouth on the face of the Ancient One. It took a lot of effort to calm down, swallow the fragrant tea in his mouth, and then look at the Ancient One who was sitting opposite with a smile. What kind of hatred is this? It's the second time, right? This is the second time that the Ancient One invited me to become the Supreme Sorcerer, right? Where is Strange? Where did you put such a big Benedict Cumberbatch? If Benedict Cumberbatch knew that I had taken his position as the Supreme Sorcerer, would he use the magic of camouflage to trap himself in the mirror space? Don't doubt it, Sherlock really believes that Strange can do this. After thinking for a long time, Sherlock sighed and looked at the Ancient One who was still sitting opposite calmly and said, I don't understand, Master Ancient One, why must it be me? Obviously you should have a better choice. Compared with that person, I think I'm not as conscious or responsible as that person. Hearing Sherlock's words, the smile on the face of the Ancient One became more vigorous, and he answered Sherlock's question. It seems that your magic also has the ability to see the future. Are you worried about Strange? No, don't worry about Strange. His fate will not be changed. But little guy, you don't have to belittle yourself. In terms of talent, you have surpassed Strange by a lot, and even reached a level that even I would envy now. Listening to the words of the Ancient One, Sherlock seemed a little confused about what the Ancient One said about his talent. In Sherlock's opinion, he only knew a little magic from Harry Potter. In terms of scope, Sherlock felt that he could never beat the Scarlet Witch. Look at the witch's magic that enveloped a small town. Sherlock felt that he could never do that. In terms of power, the Scarlet Witch was a ruthless person who held Thanos down with a hammer in the final battle. Sherlock felt that, even if he risked his life, he might not be able to reach the level of the witch. If we really talk about talent, the Ancient One should choose the Scarlet Witch instead of himself. As if sensing Sherlock's doubts, Guyi took a sip of the teacup in his hand, and then explained to Sherlock. It seems that you don't know how rare your talent is, little guy. You know, all magic in the universe is a kind of borrowing and returning relationship without exception. Take camouflage for example. If we want to use magic, we need to use mental power to communicate with Vishanti and borrow magic from Vishanti to cast magic. Even if we look at the entire universe, there are only a few people who can have their own magic, but without exception, they are all the most powerful people in the universe. Even those dimensional masters whose magic we borrow, many of them are just assimilating the magic in their own dimensions. But you have to know one thing, even if it is the assimilated magic, it is not the magic of those dimensional masters in essence. As long as the fact that you have your own magic is known to other people in the universe, then it is estimated that the threshold of the earth will be trampled by various forces. What's more, the nature of your magic is also magical enough. Guyi stopped here and took a sip of tea before continuing. I don't know if you have ever felt your own magic. Your magic is different from ours, and even different from the magic in the entire universe. Your magic is superior to ours. It can even be said that the characteristic of your magic is to rewrite, distort, or even rewrite the rules of the entire world with your own will. The idealistic characteristics of magic can almost be said to be perfectly reflected in your magic. To be honest, if your magic can be learned, even I can't help but worship you as my teacher. As the voice of Guyi fell, Sherlock felt that his jaw was about to fall to the ground. Sherlock could foresee that his magic seemed to be a very awesome existence, but he didn't expect it to be so awesome. As for the study that Guyi said, Sherlock didn't know either. After all, according to the magic knowledge that Sherlock currently mastered, the magic in Harry Potter was more like the existence of blood magic. Without knowing the magic of the Marvel world, Sherlock didn't know whether the magic he mastered could be learned by the natives of this world. Guyi seemed to see Sherlock's thoughts, and he smiled calmly before continuing. If you like, the library of camouflage will be open to you. You can read and feel it as much as you want, but be careful not to use these magics. After all, the entire earth cannot withstand the destruction of those dimensional demons at present. Sherlock never thought that the Ancient One would open the library to him. It was like a huge pie falling on his head. Sherlock also threw away his concerns. What the hell is the Supreme Sorcerer? The magic book is Sherlock's favorite. As for the invitation of the Ancient One, let's talk about it later. Although Sherlock has no intention of taking over the position of the Ancient One, after all, thinking about the various dimensional demons that the Supreme Sorcerer will face in the future. It seems like a seaman harassment. Sherlock feels an unusual headache. But no matter what, Sherlock will not give up the opportunity to get the magic book for free. Let's talk about what happens later. Anyway, with strangers a backup, Sherlock is not afraid. Chapter 19. The Life of a Loser in Camotage. Sherlock, who had figured it out, immediately stood up and bowed slightly to the Ancient One, then said, "Thank you for the generosity of the Ancient One." Sherlock's thanks were truly heartfelt. After all, he had not yet explicitly agreed to let the Ancient One inherit the position of the Supreme Sorcerer, but he had already generously opened the library to him. In this regard, he was still open-minded. The Ancient One did not seem to continue thinking about letting Elio become his successor. He nodded with a smile, as if he had thought of something, and then continued. "My personal suggestion is that, if you have not yet thought of succeeding me, then I suggest that you don't take off your helmet." After hearing what the Ancient One said, the hand that was originally thinking about taking off the helmet froze in place, and then suddenly remembered that during this period of time, Cassilis and Mordo, played by Uncle Bay, were still in Camotage. Sherlock put down his hand with some embarrassment, and suddenly he had an inexplicable sense of guilt, as if he had enjoyed the benefits, but was unwilling to help the poor Ancient One. In short, it was a very strange inexplicable sense of guilt. However, the Ancient One did not seem to notice Sherlock's embarrassment at all. Instead, he cast a magic spell. After a while, a knock on the door sounded in the room. After the Ancient One called out to come in, a fat Asian face walked into the Ancient One's temple. It was the king who became the Supreme Sorcerer during the 5 years when Doctor Strange disappeared. Seeing the serious-looking king, who seemed to be meticulous in his work, walk into the hall and respectfully salute the Ancient One, Sherlock also felt a little bit of a sense of urgency. Although the king looked extremely serious on the surface, and even after inheriting the Supreme Sorcerer, he also gave people a sense of majesty. But in fact, Sherlock, who had watched some movie clips, knew this guy is like himself, a pure fun person with a funny personality. He is one of the few characters Sherlock likes. Sherlock will never forget that this guy learned magic and pretended to be cool in front of the She-Hulk. Ancient One briefly introduced Sherlock to Wang, without even revealing Sherlock's name, and ordered Wang to find a place for Sherlock to live, and open the entire library to Sherlock. Wang also executed Ancient One's order very well. To be honest, although there is already Wi-Fi in Camotage, the overall environment is simply incomparable to Tony's mansion. But as long as you get used to the environment here, there is no doubt that life here is much more interesting than Tony's mansion, especially Wang. After Sherlock got familiar with this guy, his funny personality could no longer be hidden, and he even asked in various ways how Sherlock got this helmet, and he also wanted one. The most important thing is that Sherlock, who lives in Camotage, has overheard Wang diss his own outfit in front of his junior brothers and sisters more than once, asking those junior brothers and sisters in the practice field to practice magic seriously and not always think about committing the second disease. Sherlock expressed deep contempt for Wang's double-faced behavior, and during a meal, he bluntly said that Wang's big head could never fit on his helmet. Even if he did, it would increase the outline of his head and increase the risk of being headshot in battle. Sherlock's taunting made Wang half dead, and he challenged Sherlock to a duel without any explanation. Can Sherlock tolerate that guy? The decisive transformation disguised as a sheep made Wang lose his temper. But new problems also emerged. Wang seemed to be addicted to Sherlock's disguised sheep transformation, and kept asking Sherlock how he did it. Apart from these happy daily routines, Sherlock spent most of his life in the library with Wang, each holding a magic book, and occasionally asked Wang to go to the temple in Hong Kong to get some delicious food and drink secretly in the library together. Sherlock, who often hangs out with Wang, has not seen the two villains Cassilis and Mordo, but it is estimated that Sherlock would not care, even if he saw them. After all, in addition to teasing Wang, Sherlock's mind is mostly on the magic books in the library. Compared with the magic books in Harry Potter, Marvel's native magic gives Sherlock a more scientific feeling. In Sherlock's view, the magic in Harry Potter is more idealistic, and most of it is driven by emotions, and even emotions can greatly affect the power of magic. However, the magic in Camotage is more based on magic runes and magic circles composed of lines. It is like a permutation and combination. Different runes constitute different magic, and runes are connected by lines. With the passage of time, Sherlock sometimes wants to try the magic of Camotage, but he holds back. After all, Sherlock doesn't want to face some dimensional masters for nothing. But things often don't develop as Sherlock thought. In a fight with the king, Sherlock almost unconsciously used the shield magic of Camotage. It's just that Sherlock's shield seems to be a little different from the shields of other people in Camotage. It's a pure white shield. This incident also alarmed Guyi, but after Guyi's research, the reason why Sherlock's shield is white can only be attributed to Sherlock's own magic. After learning that his magic seems to be able to drive Camotage's magic, Sherlock became visibly excited and began to practice Camotage's magic with the help of the king. But unfortunately, except for some very basic magic, such as small shields, magic chains, portals and other small magic, Sherlock can't use most of the magic. The only exception may be the mirror space, which unexpectedly has the same effect as the traceless expansion spell. Sherlock, who was unwilling to give up, began to study the combination of the two magics, based on the magic book of Camotage and his own notes of wizards and Harry Potter. Don't mention it, Sherlock really developed a kind of magic. When this magic is used, a black mist will wrap around Sherlock's whole body, making it difficult to see Sherlock's body shape and face, and even his voice will be changed by the black mist. But apart from this, there is no other effect, but at least Sherlock doesn't have to live with his helmet all the time. This incident made Sherlock lost for a long time, and was also ridiculed by Wang for a long time. In the end, under the warning of Sherlock's sheep transformation, Wang turned over this article. Of course, when Sherlock was studying magic, Wang also read Sherlock's magic book, and the result was also very simple. In Wang's words, this is more metaphysical than metaphysics. Sherlock also confirmed one thing, that his magic is unique to him, and cannot be learned by others. Apart from these little things, Sherlock's life in Camotage can be said to be extremely wonderful. In the later period, Wang was led by Sherlock, and began to develop into Sherlock's image, funny man plus LSP plus funny guy. However, in the explosive world of Marvel, which is full of American blockbusters, happy days are often very short. Just when Sherlock was immersed in the ocean of magic, a phone call successfully pulled Sherlock back to reality. Chapter 20: A Call for Help from Jarvis. It was a pleasant evening. In the library of Camotage, Sherlock and Wang did not rest. They were reading a magic book and coffee in the library. Wang was holding the first grade transfiguration textbook given by Sherlock, and Sherlock was holding the most powerful attack magic of Camotage that Wang had found for him. The two of them were like enlightened monks. While reading their respective magic books in their hands, they drank coffee and talked nonsense. On the surface, they looked very harmonious. But in fact, both Wang and Sherlock had a classic expression of Wang Baoqiang looking at his phone. What the hell are these? Although the two of them looked at the magic book in their hands and knew every word, but they didn't know it when they were put together. But because of face, the strange desire to win between boys, neither of them said that they couldn't understand it. When the two couldn't understand the magic book in their hands, the remaining canons naturally became more concerned, especially under that strange desire to win. Neither Wang nor Sherlock had the intention to stop. Sherlock kept tricking Wang into going to the temple in Hong Kong for some midnight snacks, such as barbecued skewers, beer, barbecued pork, crayfish, fish balls, grilled seafood and the like. The reason was very simple. After getting acquainted with Wang invited Sherlock to eat once. Sherlock couldn't forget the familiar taste and tricked Wang into having a meal from time to time. Facing Sherlock's CPU, Wang naturally refused, especially after Wang knew that Sherlock was much richer than him. He refused Sherlock's CPU even more. After all, according to Sherlock's trickery, Sherlock already owed Wang a 125 howitzer, 2 double-shot anti-aircraft guns, 2 R series rifles, 1 HK series rifle, 3 AX series rifles, several pistols, a box of defensive grenades, and a box of 9-shot flash bombs. At first, Wang was still immersed in Sherlock's so-called CPU, which was much more useful than magic. After all, Wang's background had determined that he must have rarely come into contact with Sherlock's muggle weapons. But as time went by, Wang gradually came to his senses. Damn it, I'm a magician of camouflage, but others all start with two-handed magic, with extremely cool special effects, and can be called budget killers. Why is it that when it comes to me, all the cannons and guns are fired at the same time, and firepower is supreme? What's more, if this thing is really useful, then the head of camouflage, Ancient One, would definitely be in the state of a weapon angel, and the first thing he would do when facing the enemy is to fire a volley. Then all kinds of gun barrels and cannon barrels formed a steel-cast wing behind Ancient One, and he looked at all kinds of invaders with a smile and asked, "Do you know you are wrong?" Just thinking about this situation is enough for Wang Yi to sweat coldly on his forehead and call out his guilt. What's more, Sherlock, a dog-rich man, has US dollars in his hand, and this uncle, the richest man in the world, actually came to squeeze his monthly pocket money. Just thinking about it, Wang felt that this matter could not be tolerated by his uncle or aunt. With Sherlock's CPU, Wang also learned a very good trick. Every time Sherlock wanted to have a midnight snack, Wang would use this trick to fool him. Today was no exception. Although under the influence of the desire to win, neither of them showed whether the other had found a fake magic book to fool them. But in fact, both of them had already determined that the book in their hands that looked like nonsense was definitely the result of the other's mischief. Naturally, they didn't stop talking. Just as the two of them were fighting fiercely, Sherlock's phone rang very abruptly. Looking at the phone in his hand with some doubts, Sherlock found that there was no incoming call information on his phone screen. Generally speaking, such a situation is either a call from a secret government department such as the CIA or FOBO, or a pure scam call. Sherlock believed that he definitely did not have the ability to make the secret department call him, so he was very sure that this was a scam call with a strong smell of curry after the call was connected. Faced with such a fraudulent call that interrupted his thoughts, Sherlock naturally hung up the phone without any intention of answering it. Just as Sherlock hung up the phone and sorted out his thoughts to continue his conversation with Wang, his phone rang again. It was still the familiar call without any caller information. Sherlock frowned and answered the phone without any intention of answering it. Loved. No date. Lang-Xiang. Save my mother. No regrets. I don't know how to do this question. I have something to do tomorrow. I have lost weight before. I'm not a Virgo. I don't have much money. I haven't finished my homework. I don't know how to recommend Amway. I lick the lid when I drink yogurt. I don't lick my fingers when I eat potato chips. I don't know why pigeons are so big. I didn't buy insurance or express delivery. I'm not in China. I spent the money. I just bought a giant panda and have eaten it. The meat is not delicious. The force of the slap on your face just now was 32.2 newtons. At this moment, the area of your psychological shadow caused by the damage I have done to you is about 9 square centimeters. It only takes 2.7 seconds to jump from here. The probability of dying from the fall is 92.4%, and the probability of disability is 7.58%. The miraculous solutions to being safe and sound include, but are not limited to, someone is below to take the blame for you, and a strong wind blows you away. Do you have anything else to say? Listening to Sherlock's words that sounded like reading out the names of dishes, Wang, who was sitting opposite Sherlock, was a little unresponsive for a moment, especially Sherlock's word blue shit. It took Wang a long time to react before he knew what it was. Facing Sherlock's fluent oral broadcast that didn't give the other party a chance to speak, it wasn't just Wang who was silent. It seemed that the person on the other end of the phone was also silent. After a long time, Jarvis's electronic voice came out from the receiver. I'm sorry, Mr. Sherlock, I don't understand what you are talking about. I'm contacting you only because your Uncle Tony is in danger and may need your rescue. As Jarvis' voice fell, Sherlock instantly went over the plot of Iron Man in his mind and then seemed to react to something. Oh shit. Oh shit. Jarvis, send me Tony's location. I'll rush over right away. Wang, help me tell Master Ancient One that I'm sorry I can't say goodbye in person. Sherlock jumped up from the chair like a cat whose tail was stepped on. After seeing the location sent by Jarvis in his hand, he just said hello to Wang, then drew a portal and disappeared in the library. Seeing Sherlock hurried away, Wang put down the Transfiguration textbook in his hand, rubbed his chubby cheeks, sighed that young people are really damned capable, and then stood up and walked towards the Hall of Ancient One. After all, Sherlock looked very anxious. No matter what, this matter should be reported to Master Ancient One. Chapter 21 Operation Pepper Rescue. Sherlock appeared in Tony's villa. Tony no longer had the pride and complacency he had at the beginning. He was like an ordinary mortal, lying on the ground helplessly. His face was covered with patterns that looked like blood vessels, and his face was pale. The arc reactor on his chest that was supposed to emit a faint blue light had disappeared. Looking at the weak Tony, Sherlock did not hesitate at all. With a wave of his wand, the crudely made arc reactor that Tony had built in the cave flew towards Sherlock. After smashing the glass cover outside the reactor, Sherlock used a shot to restore the crudely made equipment. Then, under Tony's command, he injured the nausea and helped Tony stuff the arc reactor into the big hole in Tony's chest. After doing all this, Sherlock's face was even paler than Tony's. After all, the big hole in Tony's chest was full of sticky liquid, which was enough to make Sherlock think of some bad things. After the arc reactor was put into the big hole in Tony's chest, Tony quickly recovered his normal appearance at a speed that was almost visible to the naked eye. In just a short while, Tony was able to stand up with the help of the table. Seeing Sherlock, who was still pale and seemed a little nauseous and kept cleaning his hands, he rolled his eyes unhappily. "Do you have any recovery magic? Give me one." In response to Tony's request, Sherlock just rolled his eyes and threw a bottle of white moss potion and a piece of feckle stone for detoxification to Tony unhappily. After all, these things were bought with Tony's gold, and throwing them to him now was considered returning them to their original owners. Looking at the black stone in his hand, that exuded an indescribable smell, and the bottle of magic potion that he was very familiar with, Tony's face also turned black. Placing the magic potion and feckle stone on the table casually, Tony seemed to have remembered something and became anxious. "Sherlock, go to Stark Industrial Park quickly. I asked Pepper to investigate Obadiah Stane's computer. Now Obadiah Stane has appeared in my villa unscrupulously and took away my arc reactor, which means Pepper is in danger. Use your magical magic to save Pepper. Leave Obadiah Stane to me. I will be there soon. Hurry up, act." Tony seemed to be really panicked. After explaining, he ran to the basement like a fly. Looking at the disappearing Tony, Sherlock could only sigh helplessly. If nothing unexpected happened, his future aunt comrade Pepper should be with Carlson, the village chief of the novice village. If possible, Sherlock really didn't want to appear in front of those people from SHIELD. After all, the dogskin plaster properties of the black salted egg thing were really a bit annoying. But she was his future aunt after all, and to be honest, Sherlock had a very good impression of Pepper. In the end, he only put on the helmet Tony gave him with a sigh. After putting on the helmet, Sherlock waved the wand in his hand, and a black cloak with a hood and a pure black combat uniform appeared on Sherlock. Compared with the one he wore in Camotage, it was less second year and more mysterious. Gently wiping the helmet with his hand, a thick black mist appeared in Sherlock's hood, covering the sci-fi helmet Tony gave Sherlock. After making all the preparations, Sherlock ordered Jarvis to locate Pepper's position. With a huge 3D projection appearing in Sherlock's helmet, Sherlock also clearly saw the fast-moving red dot in Stark Industrial Park. Without any hesitation, Sherlock just waved the wand in his hand, and the whole person disappeared in Tony's villa with a sound of space distortion. When Sherlock reappeared, he was already standing in a passage full of pipes. Sherlock could even hear the loud noise coming from the ironmonger when he was destroying something not far away. Without any hesitation, Sherlock began to run towards the red dot representing Pepper. After just a few turns, Sherlock saw Pepper, who was wearing a null outfit and panicking. Next to Pepper was the novice village chief with a worrying hairline, who was trying his best to pull Pepper away. Behind the two of them was an ironmonger who was made entirely of steel and looked like a huge steel rhino, chasing the two. Pepper and Carlson also discovered Sherlock running towards them at high speed in front of them. Before Carlson could raise his pistol, a red light hit Carlson. As the red light hit, Coulson felt that the pistol in his hand suddenly came alive and began to struggle in his hand. In less than a second, the pistol in his hand flew out of his control. With the disappearance of his only weapon, Coulson's face, which was originally a little ruddy due to intense exercise, suddenly became much paler. Ironmonger was chasing him from behind, and an unknown person with strange means appeared in front of him. Coulson even thought that his career was over. Sherlock obviously didn't think so much. The reason why he used the weapon to attack Coulson was just because Coulson pointed a gun at him. In an emergency, Sherlock didn't have so much time to care about the village chief of the novice village. After knocking out Coulson's weapon, Sherlock's wand did not stop. A series of obstacle spells came out of Sherlock's wand and flew towards the charging Ironmonger. It turned out that the effect was very good. Ironmonger, who was originally charging like a rhino, began to stumble under the deceleration of Sherlock's spell. This also gave Sherlock, Pepper and Coulson time to meet, although Pepper and Coulson didn't know who this mysterious person was. But seeing him attack Obadiah Stane behind him, the two of them were probably sure that this man was not an enemy. What they didn't expect was that the moment this mysterious man approached them, he grabbed their shoulders with both hands. The next second, they felt as if they were stuffed into a twisted and extremely thin rubber tube. When they woke up, they were already on the roof of Stark Industrial Park. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 22 Iron Man vs Ironmonger. Just when the two of them didn't understand what was going on, an indescribable feeling made them hold their stomachs and empty their stomachs. After a while, the two of them finally recovered. Similarly, Pepper also knew the identity of the mysterious man in front of them. It was definitely Sherlock. Such bad behavior or such evil magic with great side effects is definitely the style of Sherlock. Seeing Pepper looking at him with a murderous look, Sherlock could only scratch the back of his head with embarrassment and helplessness and explained, "It will be like this for the first time, and you will get used to it slowly." Pepper didn't believe a word of Sherlock's explanation. After a cold snort, she looked down with worried eyes. Just when the two of them were vomiting, Tony had already flown over in his classic red and gold steel armor. At this time, the two Iron Men had already wrestled from the industrial park to the road. Obviously, Tony was at a disadvantage. This thing was the same as fighting with ordinary people. Weight had an absolute advantage compared to Tony's close-fitting armor. The weight and power of the Ironmonger, which is more like a mecha, are undoubtedly more sufficient. Seeing that the fight between the two was about to affect the fish pond, Sherlock greeted the two and warned them not to leave here, and then he moved to the vicinity of the battlefield again. Sherlock's purpose was simple, just to save the innocent people who were affected by the fish pond. Obadiah Stane, the driver of the Ironmonger, was like a madman at this time, and everything on the road became his weapon against Tony. Cars and motorcycles, under the huge body of the Ironmonger, were like sticks, constantly thrown at Tony. Tony could only rescue those innocent unfortunates while trying to deal with Obadiah Stane. Sherlock's joining obviously relieved Tony's pressure a lot, and he could even say that he had no scruples. So far, as long as Obadiah Stane grabbed a car and threw it at Tony, Sherlock would use the floating spell to steadily catch the cars flying in the air. After safely putting the car on the ground, Sherlock did not forget to give the car a shot to restore it to its original state. He would even go forward very considerately to ask if the people in the car were injured. If they were injured, Sherlock would ask them to drive to a nearby place and stop, and someone would take them for treatment later. If they were not injured, Sherlock would pat the car door to signal them to leave quickly, as it was very dangerous here. The two people's life and death fight was made by Sherlock, as if it was a fight between children and adults were cleaning their butts. Sherlock even took the time to give Tony, who was beaten badly, a shot to restore it to its original state, and repair the already scratched armor, to make it look like new. This scene made Obadiah Stane so angry that he screamed, and even began to talk nonsense uncontrollably. Facing Obadiah Stane's mouth cannon, Tony was not panicked at all, and still dealt with Obadiah Stane with ease. But as time passed, and the energy of Tony's old arc reactor weakened, Tony found that he had no way to break Obadiah Stane's Ironmonger's defense. The two fought for a long time, and it seemed that neither of them could do anything to the other. Obadiah Stane seemed to have discovered this situation and laughed triumphantly. He was not panicked at all, because his arc reactor had more energy than the second-hand reactor on Tony's chest. It was also more suitable for a war of attrition. Obadiah Stane believed that, even if Tony was a genius, he could not build a new reactor in such a short time. The proud Obadiah Stane even completely forgot about Sherlock standing on the periphery of the battlefield. While competing with Tony, he told one by one everything he deserved. But I don't know if Obadiah Stane was too proud. When talking about Tony's father, he mentioned Sherlock's parents intentionally or unintentionally. At this moment, a nameless anger surged into Sherlock's heart. Fortunately, Sherlock, who was outside the battlefield, was still rational. He called Pepper on the roof in the distance to ask about the situation. Under Sherlock's questioning, Pepper revealed the fact that Sherlock could not accept. The death of his parents was man-made, and according to the information on Obadiah Stane's computer, the mastermind behind the man-made accident was Obadiah Stane. The reason for doing so was simply because Sherlock's parents had the right to inherit the shares of Stark Group. Knowing the truth of the matter, Sherlock could no longer suppress his anger. He just waved his wand and flew in the air towards Obadiah Stane. Tony was like being tied by an invisible rope. He was dragged away from the center of the battlefield. Tony, who was a little confused, quickly learned about the incident from Jarvis and came to Sherlock with some worry. "Boy, I'm sorry, I just found out about this, too." Facing Tony's apology, Sherlock didn't react anymore, but just gritted his teeth and said to Tony, "Now, change people." After that, Sherlock didn't care about Tony's reaction and strode towards Obadiah Stane's Ironmonger. Facing Sherlock, who was walking over, Obadiah Stane was not panicked at all and even felt like laughing, because according to the observation of the Ironmonger's system, Sherlock didn't have any armor on his body. He was just an ordinary person wearing clothes. Although this person had some unknown magical tricks, in Obadiah Stane's opinion, this did not mean that Sherlock could withstand the strafing of the weapons on his body. Ha 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 ha. Tony, have you given up now, and even pushed this person who didn't even dare to show his identity to die? Facing Obadiah Stane's ridicule, Sherlock didn't care and didn't even care about what kind of reaction Tony had behind him, and went straight to Obadiah Stane's Ironmonger. "Let me introduce myself, Sherlock Felix, the nephew of Tony Stark, and the child of Cornel Phoenix and Yuffie Phoenix who were killed by you. Obadiah Stane, now it is no longer a dispute between you and Tony about the ownership of the Stark Group. Now it is a problem between you and me. Believe me, I will make you experience a death that is 10,000 times more miserable than that of my parents," Sherlock said in an unusually calm tone, as if he was stating an established fact that left no room for doubt. Chapter 23 Sherlock vs Ironmonger, Part 1. Obadiah Stane didn't take Sherlock's threat seriously at all, and even wanted to laugh. He controlled his huge body to bend down slightly, and the eyes of the helmet Tony made with his hands in the cave emitted blue light, and stared at Sherlock. "Ha ha 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 ha, little bastard, a way of death that is 10,000 times more painful than your parents? Just you? Ha 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 ha. I think you should thank me and your dear Uncle Tony. I'll let your parents die in a plane crash. It was a matter of a second. There was no pain at all. And Tony hid you very well. At one point even so well that not even I, his beloved uncle, knew of your existence. As for your desire for revenge, ha 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 ha, you can do something that your genius uncle couldn't do when he put on his latest armor. Why? Just with a little wooden stick in your hand? Are you going to poke me to death with a little wooden stick in your hand? Ha 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 ha. Obadiah Stane's arrogant laughter sounded extremely dull under the cover of Ironmonger's heavy armor. Fortunately, the sound was not very loud, and only a few people in the middle of the battlefield could hear what Obadiah Stane said. Facing Obadiah Stane's ridicule, Sherlock, who was originally furious, seemed to have sobered up a lot. A cold smile unconsciously appeared on his face. He looked up at the Ironmonger, who was almost twice his height, and said slowly, Congratulations, Obadiah Stane, you guessed it right. I will stab you to death with a small wooden stick. Smash you to pieces. As Sherlock's voice fell, the magic wand in Sherlock's hand suddenly emitted a burst of white light, and a powerful impact force flew out from the magic wand and hit the ironmonger's abdomen directly. The huge ironmonger was directly repelled more than 10 meters by this dramatic impact force. Obadiah Stane, who was inside the ironmonger, did not know what Sherlock had done, but Obadiah Stane was horrified to find out. With the huge impact, the defensive armor on the abdomen of his ironmonger, which was as thick as the front armor of a tank, turned into iron powder in an instant, disappearing without a trace, and even the internal machinery and circuits were exposed. After this attack, Sherlock also showed a confident smile on his face. This was the first time Sherlock used magic in actual combat. Just with that attack just now, Sherlock was sure of one thing. Even if his combat power could not beat those top combat powers in Marvel, he could still crush a little calumny like Ironmonger. Just with the crushing spell just now, Sherlock had a feeling that if he wanted, he could even turn Ironmonger and Obadiah Stane inside Ironmonger into ashes in an instant. But this situation obviously did not meet Sherlock's threat just now. As an honest and trustworthy person, Sherlock naturally kept his word and said that Obadiah Stane must not die well. Compared to Sherlock's calmness, Obadiah Stane on the other side no longer had the arrogance and confidence at the beginning. He didn't understand how Sherlock could completely shatter the armor on his abdomen. Looking at Sherlock walking towards him step by step, Obadiah Stane felt for the first time that he seemed a little too arrogant. Sherlock walked towards him, and every step seemed to step on his heart, which made Obadiah Stane more and more afraid. Without too much hesitation, Obadiah Stane directly manipulated Iron Overlord to open all his weapon systems. With a burst of mechanical friction sound, countless missiles and guns locked onto Sherlock in an instant. Obadiah Stane didn't even have any warning, and directly attacked Sherlock, who was moving steadily forward. Sherlock had naturally been on guard against Obadiah Stane's sneak attack. Seeing Obadiah Stane opening fire, Sherlock was not panicked at all. He waved his wand gently, and a yellow light film formed in front of him in an instant. This is a high-level application of transfiguration recorded in Dumbledore's notebook. The first to hit the light curtain transformed by Sherlock was the fastest large-caliber bullet, followed by various missiles of different calibers and powers. Obadiah Stane seemed to have seen Sherlock being torn into pieces by large-caliber bullets, and then blown into ashes by those missiles. However, the smug smile just hung on the corner of Obadiah Stane's mouth, and before it could fully bloom, it froze on Obadiah Stane's face. It was seen that no matter whether it was a cannonball, a missile or a bullet, as long as it touched the unbelievably thin light curtain in front of Sherlock, it would turn into various petals. Under the effect of inertia, petals of various colors floated around Sherlock for a while. Pink cherry blossoms, white magnolias, fiery red roses, orange and yellow forsythia, colorful and beautiful. But such a beautiful scene was like a death-like scene to Obadiah Stane. None of his weapons could threaten the man who was not wearing any armor, and he couldn't even stop Sherlock's progress. For a moment, a huge fear took over Obadiah Stane's body and mind. He didn't know how to defeat this young man with superb skills. There was even a moment when Obadiah Stane began to regret provoking this young man. Without any hesitation, Obadiah Stane wanted to escape after seeing that his weapons were ineffective, and saw Sherlock getting closer and closer to him. Obadiah Stane, with the idea of keeping the Green Mountains, there is no fear of running out of firewood, started the booster on his feet without any hesitation to escape from here. But he forgot that the booster on Iron Overlord's feet was obviously weaker than the booster on Tony's armor. The most fatal disadvantage was that it was very slow at the start. When black smoke began to come out of Obadiah Stane's Ironmonger's feet, Sherlock almost immediately understood what Obadiah Stane wanted to do. With a gentle wave of the magic wand, Sherlock's magic manipulated the ground to transform into a huge rock hand. The Ironmonger, who had just taken off, was caught in the rock hand like a toy. Looking at the Ironmonger struggling in the rock hand, Sherlock had a cruel smile on his face. Obadiah Stane, I told you, I will let you experience a death that is 10,000 times more painful than my parents. As the protagonist, you can't run away before I fulfill my promise. Chapter 24. Death of Obadiah Stane. It would have been better if Sherlock hadn't said anything. As soon as he finished speaking, Obadiah Stane struggled even more violently. The giant hand made of rock continued to drop rocks as Obadiah Stane struggled. However, under Sherlock's magic power supply, rocks were constantly added to replace the parts destroyed by Iron Overlord. Without giving Obadiah Stane more time, Sherlock narrowed his eyes slightly, and as he waved his wand, a giant snake made of dark blue flames gushed out of Sherlock's wand. The moment the giant flame snake appeared, it seemed to have a target, and it almost didn't stop. It directly climbed onto the giant hand made of rock, and appeared in front of Obadiah Stane the next second. Just like a giant python hunting in nature, the giant flame snake obviously regarded Obadiah Stane and the Iron Overlord it controlled as its prey, and directly entangled the giant hand made of rock and the huge body of Iron Overlord. The body made of fiendfire burned the giant rock hand holding Ironmonger into hot magma in almost an instant, and it broke into pieces. The extremely high temperature also made Ironmonger lose the ability to resist. Obadiah Stane looked at the constant alarm sounds inside the mecha, and the panic in his heart could no longer be concealed. He almost screamed and activated his last resort. An escape device hidden inside Ironmonger. Accompanied by a sound of mechanical transmission, Obadiah Stane was ejected by Ironmonger like a waste. He fell very embarrassedly not far away. Without Obadiah Stane's control, Ironmonger was also turned into a pool of molten iron in an instant under the scorching of the giant fire snake. Seeing that the giant fire snake had completed its mission, Sherlock used the counterspell without hesitation to make the giant snake, made of fiendfire, disappear without a trace. This is the magic from Grindelwald's notes. Compared with Dumbledore's notes, Grindelwald's notes contain more various kinds of black magic, among which fiendfire is the one Sherlock knows better. However, the control of fiendfire has always been Sherlock's difficulty. Even if he has mastered the improved fiendfire by Grindelwald, it is still quite laborious for Sherlock. It is precisely because of this that Sherlock stopped the fiendfire magic almost at the moment when Obadiah Stane ejected and Ironmonger turned into molten iron. Obadiah Stane looked at Sherlock in horror as he was still moving steadily towards him. The white hood and cloak, plus the black mist under the hood, made Sherlock look like a demon from hell. Even the hot molten iron that Ironmonger turned into, Sherlock just waved the wand in his hand and the molten iron disappeared without a trace. Devil. You must be a devil. Obadiah Stane had almost lost his mind. Looking at Sherlock who was approaching, Obadiah Stane almost climbed up from the ground with his hands and feet, howling and running away. Boundless fear had almost occupied Obadiah Stane's mind. Under fear, Obadiah Stane did not notice any abnormality around him. But Tony, who was standing on the edge of the battlefield, could see it clearly, although Obadiah Stane looked like he was running away in the opposite direction. But the space around Obadiah Stane was constantly compressed around Obadiah Stane as he moved forward. Although Obadiah Stane had tried his best to escape, it seemed that he was almost the same as standing still. But Sherlock behind Obadiah Stane did not have such a situation. He continued to move forward step by step. Even since Obadiah Stane was repelled by Sherlock, Sherlock had been keeping moving forward. Obadiah Stane's attacks and strategies could not stop Sherlock's progress. Even now, Obadiah Stane could not escape Sherlock's control. The magic that Sherlock used to control Obadiah Stane's escape and make him look like he was standing still was a variation of the space magic that Sherlock learned in Camotage. It was a simplified version of the gorgeous space magic of the Ancient One. In just a short while, Sherlock stood behind Obadiah Stane, looking at the embarrassed Obadiah Stane with a smile and said slowly, "I said, as the protagonist of this play, you can't run away." The voice from behind him scared Obadiah Stane. He didn't understand why he had been running for a long time, but the devil behind him could still catch up with him. In panic, Obadiah Stane almost fell to the ground with a funny posture of tripping over his left foot and right foot. Although he was already in a state of embarrassment, the fallen Obadiah Stane still had an extremely strong desire to escape. He turned around and sat up, looking at Sherlock and begging for mercy. "Let me go. I shouldn't compete with Tony for control of the group. I shouldn't be obsessed with murdering your parents and Tony. Let me go. As long as you let me go, everything I have will be yours immediately. As long as you let me go." Hearing Obadiah Stane's begging for mercy, Sherlock stopped his actions, as if he was really thinking about Obadiah Stane's proposal. Seeing that Sherlock seemed to be thinking about his proposal and looked distracted, Obadiah Stane took out a carved 1911 from his arms without any hesitation. This was the self-defense weapon he had always carried with him. For decades, it had never left his side. But it was obvious that Obadiah Stane had made a wrong calculation. Sherlock was not thinking about Obadiah Stane's proposal. It could even be said that he had been guarding against Obadiah Stane's sneak attack. Even if he stopped and pretended to think, it was just a game of cat and mouse. The moment Obadiah Stane pulled out his pistol, Sherlock's wand emitted a milky white light, which hit Obadiah Stane, who was sitting on the ground. Almost instantly, Obadiah Stane, who had just aimed at Sherlock, was horrified to find that except for his eyes, his whole body seemed to be frozen, and he could no longer move. His finger was clearly on the trigger, and if he had only half a second, it would have been enough for him to kill the enemy to the extreme, but now there was no possibility of resistance. In an instant, a huge sense of despair almost overwhelmed Obadiah Stane, and the next second, that sense of despair turned into deep fear. After Sherlock petrified Obadiah Stane with the petrification spell, he shook the wand in his hand lightly, and the original wand disappeared without a trace, turning into an ice cone as big as a tea needle. I've said that I will make you face your own death in a way that is 10,000 times more miserable than my parents. I mean what I say. As the voice fell, Sherlock bypassed Obadiah Stane's hand holding the gun, and pushed the ice cone against Obadiah Stane's chest. Then, at the slowest speed, he pushed the ice cone in his hand into Obadiah Stane's heart little by little. Of course, before killing Obadiah Stane with the ice cone, Sherlock did not forget to add a super sense spell buff to this guy. This spell is mostly used by wizards to enhance the 5 senses, but this spell is also terrible. If the speed is not controlled well, it is easy to appear in the Death God. The same effect of the Superman potion when Nita fought against Sao Paulo. In the wizard world, if no one helps you to remove the spell, then wait for your mental breakdown. But now, Sherlock feels that he can let Obadiah Stane experience the joy of Sao Paulo, wait for death for 100 years, and then use 100 years to feel the tip of the knife slowly piercing his heart. I hope this guy's brain can hold on. Chapter 25. Everything is over. As Sherlock's ice cone penetrated deeper, Sherlock watched Obadiah Stane's eyes change from the initial panic to hysterical madness, and finally turned into nothingness, and his eyes no longer had any spirit. Looking at the ice cone that was almost up to the handle of Obadiah Stane's chest, Sherlock stood up, exhaled a fierce breath, and then waved his wand, and in the blink of an eye, Obadiah Stane's body was turned into ashes by the flames. After doing all this, Sherlock, who killed his enemy with his own hands, felt as if a big stone was put down in his heart in an instant, and a feeling of blessing came to his mind. Sherlock even felt that the magic problems that he had not figured out before became extremely transparent in this moment, as if a big stone in his heart was suddenly put down. It may be that Sherlock helped the original owner fulfill his wish and killed his enemy with his own hands. Sherlock can even feel that his connection with this world seems to have become a little tighter. Just when Sherlock was feeling the clearness he had never experienced before, Tony controlled the armor to land beside Sherlock, opened the armor's mask, and looked at Sherlock standing there with a worried look. "Smelly boy, you." Tony was interrupted by Sherlock before he finished speaking. Don't be sentimental, my dear Uncle Tony. Shit. Obadiah Stane's affairs have nothing to do with you. Just don't blame me for killing your uncle with my own hands. After listening to Sherlock's irresponsible words, Tony rolled his eyes in annoyance, patted Sherlock's shoulder very hard, and then continued. "What are you thinking, little boy? That's not my uncle. You know, I almost died in the hands of this guy, twice." Tony seemed to have forgotten that he was still wearing armor, and this pat almost made Sherlock, who was still in the flesh, kneel down directly. Sherlock very reasonably suspected that this guy was taking revenge on him because he had robbed his enemy. Sherlock was able to remain calm and composed in front of Ironmonger. If he was really knocked to his knees by Tony, Sherlock's strong, cold and mysterious personality would probably collapse completely. Sherlock rolled his eyes at Tony, who was standing beside him with a smug look. For a moment, he even thought about letting Tony experience the joy of turning into a sheep. Sheep in armor is definitely a very interesting thing. Sherlock's face was hidden under the helmet in the thick black fog. Tony didn't know that he seemed to have tried his best to turn into a sheep. He still looked at Sherlock with pride. Looking at Tony's appearance, Sherlock sighed helplessly. Looking at the black suits that kept gathering towards the two of them in the distance, and Pepper who was rushing in the front, Sherlock decided to let Tony go temporarily and find time to retaliate. Looking at the dilapidated battlefield around him, Sherlock, with the idea of being a good person to the end, gently waved his wand, and under the effect of restoration, the originally dilapidated environment with debris and rubble everywhere seemed to have been paused in an instant. The next second, the originally broken environment began to move backwards, as if the rewind button had been pressed. The broken stones slowly gathered together and turned into a complete stone, and then were pulled back to its original position by an inexplicable force. The twisted and broken cars that were affected also began to slowly return to their original state with the sound of metal twisting. In just a few breaths, the streets that were originally like Syria returned to their original state, and even the wall of the Stark industrial zone that the two had crashed into was repaired intact. Looking at the changes in the surrounding environment, Tony whistled happily, and then looked at Sherlock and said, "Cool. Honey, you saved me a lot of compensation." Sherlock just smiled at Tony's words. After all, what Tony didn't know was that Sherlock only restored the state of the streets. For the injured and frightened people, Sherlock's magic had no effect. And the most important thing is that Sherlock was very cunning and did not repair the damage caused by the fight between the two people in Stark Industrial Park. So Tony still had to pay the compensation, and he might not even pay a penny less. It's just that Tony, as a rich man, doesn't care much about this money. Looking at the shield agents getting closer and closer to him, and Pepper running in front of the shield agents, Sherlock, who didn't want to reveal his identity for the time being, felt more and more headache. Looking at Tony beside him, Sherlock suddenly felt blessed and said quickly, "Dear Uncle Tony, the rest is up to you. After all, I have solved the most troublesome thing, haven't I?" After saying this, he didn't care about Tony's reaction, and disappeared in the crackling sound of space distortion, leaving only Tony who hadn't reacted yet. Looking at Sherlock who disappeared without a trace, Tony was stunned for a moment and just smiled, and cursed him as a bad boy, and then opened his arms to welcome Pepper who was running towards him. When Pepper came over, she didn't give him a hug as Tony had expected. Instead, she began to look at Tony's whole body repeatedly. Under Sherlock's magic, Tony's armor didn't even have a scratch. He was ready for the battlefield, but he was not ready for the battlefield. He still looked brand new. Seeing that Tony was fine, Pepper breathed a sigh of relief. When she was about to ask about Sherlock's situation, Tony stopped her with a look. The smart Pepper immediately swallowed the words that were on the tip of her tongue and followed Tony's gaze to Carlson who was standing not far from them. Facing the sight of Tony and Pepper, Carlson was not panicked at all. He still kept a professional smile and asked Tony, "Hello, Mr. Stark, I think this is not the first time we meet. Is it convenient to ask about your relationship with the Mr. Fantastic who just showed his power?" Facing Carlson's temptation, Tony responded fluently, "Ah, you are. Let me think. What's the name of that guy from the National Bureau of Logistics?" Phil Carlson, Strategic Homeland Defense Attack and Logistics Support Agency. Seeing that Tony seemed to want to play dumb and change the subject, Carlson did not give Tony any chance. Facing Carlson's relentless pressure, Tony was not polite at all. "Okay, Strategic Homeland Defense Attack and Logistics Support Agency. This name is really hard to pronounce. Just call you SHIELD. As for the Mr. Fantastic you mentioned, sorry, I don't know. Maybe he is just a kind-hearted person who helps out. What do you think?" Korvosh. "It's Carlson. Forget it. I get it. Leave it to us next. Mr. Tony. I think Miss Potts has been scared enough tonight, hasn't she?" After hearing Carlson's words, Tony no longer hesitated and immediately called out and directly pulled Pepper towards his own Stark Industrial Park. It was not until Tony's figure disappeared that Carlson put his hand on his headset. "Director," he denied it. After hearing Carlson's words, the person on the other end was silent for a while before continuing to give orders. Leave the rest to me, Carlson. You maintain the scene, and I will arrange for the scientific department to conduct inspections. Got it, Director. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.